I got the power. I'm gonna go grab a spoon so I can start banging on my coffee mug.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we are actually broadcasting now. So, hey, church planners, this is Pete Mitchell.
And the other guy. And this is Peyton Jones.
You know, what's so funny is we've got a real mix of people who have signed up to attend this webinar. We've got our diehard fans.
You hear that?
What?
I hear us being played back to ourselves.
Well, not me.
This is us like 10 seconds before.
What do you mean? What are you talking about? You've totally lost me now.
Dude, I'm hearing a playback for some reason of what just happened.
Well, because you've probably got it open on another screen.
Ah, that's why.
Yeah, so you got the delay
I'm
going
on this
on.
webinar. Let me shut that one down.
Uh-oh.
There we go. Better. I'm two-timing.
Hey, so can you guys type into the chat box and let us know if you can hear us fine? Because we hear each other fine, but that's not unusual for us. So
Dude,
just go ahead.
I didn't realize you were actually putting on. We were like totally screwing around. We had prayed, we're all ready, and then all of a sudden Pete got up and did Running Man, and they were jams, and then suddenly I hear you playing that back. I'm like, oh my gosh, man! All that screwing around's on here right now.
I told you, just like when we did the video, when I hit start broadcast, it's live.
Right
So
on.
Tim just put in there, well, that was a great start.
Hey, typical the Church Planner podcast and magazine. Absolutely, man.
See, that's the thing. We got a good mix. We had about 40 or 50 people who don't know us sign up for the webinar. So they're probably thinking this is going to be a respectable webinar.
God help them.
While the information is going to be dynamite, I don't know about respectable. That's not really what we do really well. So
we run the Church Planner podcast for those of you that don't know us, and we do this every week. We've been called the Beavis and Butthead of church planning. We've been likened to Love Line, but what we do is we talk very seriously about God. We don't take ourselves very seriously. That's how it pans out. And to me, like being on video, this is kind of like I was watching Wizard of Oz with my daughter the other day. First time we showed it to her. She's 5. She can handle the Wicked Witch, right? That was a parenting fail. And anyway, so to me, this is like, when she walks out of the house, like, and it's black and white, and she's in Oz, and suddenly it's color. There's like a third dimension on here because we're kind of ugly. We're probably faces that are made for radio.
Hey, speak for yourself. This right here, this is beautiful.
I like what Brad wrote. Dave has a big gap to fill in respectability. That's why we've got him on here, Brad.
Charlie's my hero. Charlie just said, I have to agree with Pete. So.
Yeah, he wants something from you.
So since we've got, somewhat of a timeline, let me give you guys a little breakdown here of the schedule. Let me actually pull open that screen. Start sharing that one. All right. So here's the schedule for today's call. First, Peyton and I are going to be going deep on church multiplication. And if you don't know who Peyton is, he's the respectable one between the two of us.
No.
Hey, I said between the two of us. I didn't say you were respectable like in general, but between the two of us, you're the much more respectable one. I, on the other hand, was a pastor's kid, so we all know I'm trouble from the get-go. So Peyton is a serial church planner. How many churches have you planted personally?
Oh, only I have planted personally, if you don't count the churches that I've helped with, I have personally planted 2 hubs. But because I serve as an apostolic guy, that number goes up to goes up to 9 church plants, probably 10 now.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really what you've been called to do at this point, is you're helping other guys plant their churches. Because I know right now you're working with 3 in North San Diego, right? That area.
Yeah.
And plus, we're doing Stanton up here in, I guess Stanton is technically Orange County, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, we got the hub in Long Beach. And anyway, we're going to be going over some great content here for the next hour and 45. And by the way, for those of you that have been wondering about Jump School, which we've been telling you about on the Church Planner podcast, and by the way, if you're new to us, haven't listened to the Church Planner podcast, we'll just tell you right now, you definitely want to go download that. You can get it on iTunes or on Stitcher. Every week, every Monday, we come out with a new episode. Though the last, I don't know, month or two, we've been doing 2 a week, Monday, and then usually an interview on Wednesday. This will actually count as our second one for this week. In fact, we might take the audio from this and put it out there on the podcast. But it's the only weekly Church Planner podcast out there. And, it's obviously it's free. It's on iTunes, on Stitcher if you're on an Android device. So get that. But for those who have been listening to us on that, we've been talking about Jump School. So we've got 2 outcomes for today. We're going to give you some great content. You guys are going to learn a lot of really cool things that you can take back and start implementing in your churches. For those of you that are interested in Jump School, we're going to talk a little bit about that and how you guys can become a part of that. If that's not something you want to do, don't worry about it. Everything we do is free outside of that stuff. So, definitely just make sure you have your notebook out for the great content. Then we're going to have a quick 15-minute break, probably 10 to 15-minute break, just because we don't want to make everyone just sit down and go solid all the way through this thing. And then we're going to come back, and we've got Dave Ferguson, and of course Peyton Jones and that other guy, whatever his name is, the guy that you have to agree with him.
The good-looking one, apparently.
Apparently.
So
that's the schedule that we've got. The chat box, which you guys should all see on the side of the webinar screen there, go ahead and type your questions in as we go. We want to do this as much interactive as we can. So as you have questions, just ask them. And Peyton will be delivering most of the content, and so I'll be reading all the questions and bringing them to Peyton as we go through this thing. But you guys should also know, too, that we've got about a 60-second lag between when you guys hear it and when we set it. It's just the way Google Hangouts work. So just know it's not going to be, Johnny on the spot. It might take us a couple minutes to get around to answering your question. But anyway, anything else you wanted to say, Peyton, before we dive deep here on church multiplication?
Nope.
All right. Well, that was nice and concise. That was like me whenever you ask me a question on the podcast. Pete, do you have any questions for our person today? Nope. I'm good.
I can always tell when you were telling me, man, sometimes you ask me at the worst possible time. And
we got Gabriel Provencio. Gabriel Provencio just got on.
Hey, Gabriel's in the house. Good morning, my brother.
Gabriel is like one of my favorite church planners we've ever met and interviewed. We met him at a pastor's conference a couple years back, and dude is just on fire for God and what he does, and does a lot of street church stuff, deals a lot with the homeless, deals a lot with the down and outs, drug addicts. I mean...
That's just weird to me.
Actually, no, it's not. So anywho, Peyton, why don't we
kick it off here?
Yeah, let's get respectable.
Yeah, so guys, thanks for joining us for this. Just so you know, the reason that we're doing this is because Ed Stetzer in Lifeway Research, if you don't know, he's one of the leading missiologists out there. He's got a lot of financial backing, works for the Baptists. Lifeway is an arm of the Baptist denomination. And they profiled the top challenges that planners face. And the number one challenge was how to produce a multiplication or a culture multiplication, a church plant that will reproduce itself or go beyond itself. Obviously, when you're a certain number of years down the road, our fear is that our church plan is going to become self-absorbed and forget about the world on the other side of the four walls. But if you don't get that right from day one, then you're going to be in trouble. So as I said, I've planted 2 hubs, but I've also helped. Before I planted my first hub, which was accidental, I'd helped numerous teams. I'd been in Hungary, I'd been in New Zealand, I had gone to Wales, I had planted out of Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones's church, and in each case I was always kind of like the evangelistic guy on the team, and I was committed, and I without realizing it, I was serving in a network as the evangelistic wing who would kind of travel around like Paul's guys did, and I was serving a network without realizing it. And so my experience over the years has been serving alongside of teams, serving in teams, and then leading teams. And at a certain point in my ministry shifted from being my ministry. My ministry became about other people's ministry. And I felt this, it was during the first hub that I planted. Obviously, like I said, I had been involved in other churches. And at a certain point, I felt that God was calling me to equip planters, because I was always discipling, always raising guys up and sending them out. And so I could remember at a certain point planting churches. When I planted my first hub, it wasn't as exciting to me as actually equipping other guys and still helping other guys. And I guess that's what I've always been. I've always been kind of like the catalyst who helps other people. If a church planter is planting, but he's more a shepherd or a teacher, and he's not really gifted with evangelism, I took great joy in going there and being the evangelistic wing of that team. So that's kind of a little bit about my background, and the reason this is such a big deal is because it's easy for a church plant to plant a church, and that's not what we're talking about.
Hey, Peyton, let me ask you, one of the questions came in here from Mark. What's the difference between a hub and a church?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. A hub is exactly what we're talking about. It's a sending church. So it is going to be a church that continues to churn out church plants. So Newbury church planting really was a church planting movement that came out of where I was when I was a missionary on the mission field in Wales. I was there for 12 years. I had worked within a lot of the churches that existed, and like I said, I started a reading group out of Starbucks around Dan Brown Da Vinci Code, not thinking at all that I was going to start a church. And 30 non-believers turned up. That became a church, and again, because I was leaving, I've always been the guy that I'm leaving, I'm not staying. So I ended up planting a church there on accident, and the more it became obvious, the night before our launch, the guy who was going to take it, that I was helping, looked at me and said, "Hey, man, I'm not coming. And my wife works an hour away, and we're moving there, and I want to support her right now." And I was on my way back to America. So I ended up roped into this, but God kind of changed it for me from day one, that it was about, equipping others. So a hub is a church planting factory. It's going to be a church that plants out of itself. And so, like, Jerusalem became, really, if you want to think about it, a hub. They discipled people, they spread out, and the gospel went out to Samaria, Judea, and eventually up to Antioch, where Paul was brought. Antioch became a hub where they sent out missionaries, starting notably with Paul and Barnabas, who had been there for a year. And then we see Ephesus, and eventually Rome. The book of Acts kind of ends with Rome. That's where Paul needs to get, and of course, traditionally, he goes beyond to Spain, and there's a lot of research about what happened there, that wasn't necessarily the end game for Paul. He comes back to Rome, and Rome, like the old saying, all roads lead to Rome. Well, all roads obviously led out of Rome. And so that was the center of the world, and that's where he went. So hope that kind of answers that question. If it doesn't, tell me, no, that answer sucked, please do it again.
Well, the answers only suck when they come from Pete, but that's all right.
Hey, I'll have you know that Pete actually, when we're coaching church planners together, Pete contributes good things, and sometimes even I have to agree with Pete.
Oh, that's a soundbite, man. That one's
on film too. It's on film. Dang it! What was I thinking?
All right, so let me ask you the first question here. What do you mean by multiplication? Let's start off with that.
Okay. The two terms you need to know, guys, are addition and multiplication. So addition would be like I plant a church and I say, oh, it's a hub, and I just plant another church, and I kind of dust my hands off and say, done, I planted a church. Well, that's addition. That's just me saying, hey, I want to plant a church, and so 1 + 1 = 2. Now I have 2 church plants. Multiplication is where I've got hardwired into my DNA literally a reproducing movement to where it can grow rapidly beyond myself, and basically, like, let's say I empower. It more is focused on people rather than the church plant. I'm empowering people, and I'm getting people empowered. I'm basically reproducing myself. And so I'm making little me's. If I'm a church planter, I'm making other church planters. If I'm more apostolic, I'm a guy who plants out, then I am going to make guys who plant out, if that makes any kind of sense. So multiplication would be, instead of me planting an apple tree, that's addition. One tree plants another tree. I plant an orchard. And so I plant multiple churches that themselves plant multiple churches. So to use an illustration, there was a Welsh guy named Rhys Pegleg. It was said, he led one guy to Christ. So he had a one child, but he had 1,000 grandchildren, right? Because the guy he led to Christ led thousands to the Lord. But in a church planting multiplication movement, you're planting multiple churches that are going to literally plant multiple churches, and you lose track, and it becomes a church planting movement or part of a multiplication movement. It's not a pyramid selling scheme. In fact, pyramid selling is very much a method. Once you kind of empower a person and release them, you put them in the hands of the Holy Spirit. And I can tell stories about guys that are just hardwired for this. We've got a guy named Ruben who is one of our church planners. He's now leading the team in San Pedro. Like me, he's the guy that plants and moves on. I've moved on from the hub in Long Beach. I'm now concentrating my efforts down in San Diego County. We're still planning up in LA, but again, I can take my hands off the steering wheel, and that continues to happen because the guys that are there are going to keep planning. Well, Ruben is an electrician. He's an ex-con. He got saved in the back of a cop car. It was the first time he cried out to God. He largely got discipled in prison, and when he got out, he came to one of our New Breed church planning conferences. I caught him the day after he got out of prison. He was roaming the hallways of a church, and I said, hey, man, what are you doing tomorrow? And he goes, I'm just trying to keep busy, man, so I don't go back to jail. And Ruben started training an apprenticeship program as an electrician, and as he got, he'd go out to like Chino, or he'd be out in some place, way out in the back of Beyond's, and he'd say, oh, I got a cousin out there. He's a Hispanic guy. He's got a really big family. He's like, I got a cousin out there. So I looked him up, and I started sharing the gospel with him. And he would meet in the living room with his cousin and her boyfriend, and within maybe a month or 2 months, they'd have 25, 30 people there. And, he would ask me, this is early on, we were planning Long Beach, just because I was empowering him and equipping him. He would come to me with the problem like, hey, this is the second one that I've done. What do I do with all these people? Because I'm moving off that job now. I'm not going to be there. And so, he would take 25, 30 people to an existing church. And he would, these were churches starting up, but he would, he didn't know what to do next, so he just let him in to another church. We got some questions coming in.
We got a lot of questions coming in. So,
aren't you guys listening to me? You're just asking me questions? What's up with that?
So let me see here. We've got, let's start with Steve here. What's the overall structure you work with, and what role would a church planting center have in relation to hubs?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I'm wondering, Pete, if I should wait and kind of sure. I'm going to answer that question.
All right. Well, if we're going to answer that one, we'll answer that one later.
Yeah. Because I'm worried it might be putting the cart before the horse to answer that one right now.
You know, a couple of these are really well. These are all really good. So let's do that then. We'll go ahead and save these for a little bit later after we've gotten through more of the material.
I see that Joshua's quoted Neil Cole and David Garrison. I've got quotes from both of these guys, so we're thinking along the same track. These are guys. By the way, there are some books. There's T4T. There's What Jesus Started. Movements that changed the world. Viral churches. These are all books. If you're writing them down, or you're freaking out now, we'll mention them again. But I do want to mention from Neil Cole. This is what he said. I'm going to read this. This is from a book called Search and Rescue. He says, I am no mathematician. My high school math teacher would chuckle at the thought that I'd have anything good to contribute to a conversation about math. But maybe it takes simple-minded, mathematically challenged individuals to help us see the obvious. Basic math is made up of 4 different processes involving numbers: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. In the sequence of positive numbers, addition and multiplication gain in numerical sum, while subtraction and division reduce. Subtraction and division, sadly, are probably the norm in many churches in America right now. But when it comes to the kingdom of God, we want to increase, not decrease. So addition and multiplication are more preferable. Multiplication is a popular topic in missions in the church today, but unfortunately, when you look more closely, much of what people call multiplying is really just addition. When a church starts a small group or adds a small group, it's often called multiplying. When another worship service is added on a Sunday morning, it's called church multiplication, but it's only addition. Adding a venue for worship in your church or a satellite campus is not multiplying a church. It is merely adding. I am not against addition, but let's not call addition multiplication. The thing about basic math is that it is a world of absolutes. There's one right answer and an infinite number of wrong answers to every equation. But if the processes are mixed up, the solutions are way off. In Christendom today, we have poor math skills, and our bottom line is wrong in the end because of it. Imagine what would happen in life if you got 2 processes mixed up. What would happen if NASA engineers added when they should have multiplied? What if Wall Street mixed things up, multiplied when they should have only added? The result would be problematic at best, disastrous at worst. So why do we confuse this when it comes to reaching the world for Christ? He says if you merely add another 2 to 4, the sum is 6, but if you multiply 2, you get 8, 16, and now you know you are multiplying. And I thought that was a really great kind of summary of what we're talking about. And he just uses an illustration. He says, this is from a guy named Christopher Schalk. Imagine a water lily growing on a pond with a surface of 14,000 square feet. The leaf of this species of water lily has a surface of 15.5 square inches. At the beginning of the year, the water lily has exactly 1 leaf. Okay, so picture a pond. 15.5 square inches is this one water lily, and 14,000 square feet it's got to cover. After 1 week, there are 2 leaves. A week later, there are 4. After 16 weeks, half of the water surface is covered with leaves. The authors then ask, how long will it take until the second half of the pond will also be covered? Another 16 weeks? No. It will take just a single week, and the pond will be completely covered. And that's because half of that pond is producing, and so the growth is much more rapid. And so that's what happens. That's what we want to see with church. We want to see it multiplying.
So, I'm just going to bring up this question that I've got because I think I understand now a little bit more about something you and I talked about yesterday, because people were saying, oh, is this going to be all about, the pyramid when it comes to church multiplication? I didn't understand that. I'm like, what do they mean by pyramid? So what you're referring to, like when you say, you empower guys and you send them out, you're not talking about building up necessarily, more and more, I don't even know how to put this, but more and more satellite churches of, the mothership, so to speak, where some people, I could see how they could see that as, almost like, pyramid building of, hey, we've got the mothership and then all these satellites. But you're saying, raising up guys to actually send them out and do their church, their own church, where it might look different, maybe because of who they're trying to reach. It might be structured different, but basically connected only in the sense that you've trained them up. You know that they're a gospel church, so to speak, but they're their own They're their own thing. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting because what we're saying is when you plant your first church, you need to be thinking about the guys in front of you as church planters. You need to think about every single person in front of you as a potential church planter. And the old saying is true that we teach what we know, but we reproduce what we are. It's important that churches model this. If you're not modeling reproduction to your disciples, then they won't do what you're doing. So many churches are self-absorbent. They don't think beyond themselves. And so how are you going to get a church full of people to think beyond themselves unless you as the leader of that church are modeling that? If they see you building your own personal empire, the church, it's like your life work, they're going to turn to their area of life and they'll focus on building their own personal empire because that is what the church has modeled. But if a church can sacrifice of itself, if a church can look at the bigger picture and say, look, we could keep all the goodies, keep all the resources here, but what has happened here, what the Holy Spirit has done here is so awesome that rather than having a church of 1,000, why don't we have 10 churches of 100? Why don't we make that our game plan, that we reproduce and we hardwire into the DNA that they reproduce? So when you come to New Breed Church Planning, one of the things that is a distinctive for us, that before you sign your name to that paper, you have to say that you will plant out. Like that's something you agree to do. And so, you know, that's kind of the deals. You've got to model this. And so as you're doing that, the people that you're naturally discipling and training up are going to be thinking, man, we want to do what was done here. I tell everyone that I plant with, you have the benefit of watching this thing from the ground up. It's not rocket science. You know, you'll be able to take it and do it. So so many of the interns that I see in mega churches, if you think of some of you guys on here, you probably are interns and you've been working and doing church chores, and there's nothing for you to do. Like, in fact, there's no place for you to go up. You ever notice that? Like, you're an intern, but that guy's not going to get out of the way for you to actually do real ministry. You're trying to change the world behind a desk. You're doing church chores. You're a pencil pusher for Jesus. And it's just not what you go into ministry for. And I'm always telling mega church pastors, hey, you have interns? Give them to me, because I know you don't know what to do with them. You're going to like tell them to go put an app out and take an existing church. Throw them at me. I've got a space for them now. I've got a community in Stanton, or we're going to replant in Long Beach. I know exactly where to put them. Or we're in North County, San Diego. When I was in Wales, hey, there's this city over there. They need a gospel witness. And that's how it works, you know. But I always tell them, hey, man, ship them to me, and we'll use them. And I just can't imagine Paul walking in and seeing an intern in our average church and going, yeah, hey, well done, man. You know, that's what it's all about, man. You know.
Yep. Cool.
So, yeah. So, yeah. I'm noticing these questions coming in. What is the DNA of churches that you're multiplying? What are the churches about? Worship classes, small groups, serving the nursery. What are your churches about? That's a great question, Aaron. I think the obvious answer for me is the Great Commission, and it depends on what you think the Great Commission is all about. I mean, he told us to preach the gospel, so that's reaching the lost and make disciples. So in other words, you're preaching the gospel and you're making disciples who reproduce that and preach the gospel, go to the ends of the earth. And so that's my DNA. I'm very radical when it comes to what I think church is. I'm of the belief that, and I don't pay lip service to it, that the church is here literally to reach lost people. And that's it, man. Like, we're here to reach lost people. And as we focus on the gospel in us and it overflows out of us, we're best served. And I know some people are like, well, what about discipleship? Well, look, the missing ingredient in most Christians' life is mission. The average Christian is bored because they're at church and it's like a country club and they just don't get it. They're like, man, especially young people, they're like, what's this about, man? I don't get it. I noticed back when I was a youth pastor, if I asked people to read their Bible, pray, give their money, be concerned about missions. Boom, they just didn't get it, you know, and because they were an audience. But when I put them in mission, they got it. Suddenly, I didn't have to tell them to read, pray, because they weren't an audience anymore. They were now active participants. And so when I plant a church, I go into a difficult area. Comes from having been in a country for 12 years that had 1.6% of its population Christian, and that was it, man. I literally I go into difficult areas. You only stay in a church that we're planting if you want to reach the lost, because it won't have all the fancy programs. It'll probably freak you out. Sunday school is a little bit dangerous, and you know, you got the cross-dressing prostitute coming. So that's it, man. One step before hell. We deal with a lot of deaths, a lot of ODs. Half my leadership are ex-cons, and it's just the DNA, man. It's how you reach people that need reaching. I noticed Aaron says discipleship and mission are equal to me. Me too. I'm sure you picked up on that.
Cool. All right. So, what is a church multiplication movement? Hey, and I like my role in the webinar. All I got to do is ask the question. That's cool.
Well, you can answer this if you want.
So that's the question. What is a church multiplication movement? Go.
Okay. Well, this is from Ed Stetzer and Warren Bird. This is their definition. A church multiplication movement is a rapid reproduction of churches, planting churches measured by a reproduction rate of 50% through the third generation of churches, with new churches having 50% new converts. So one of the questions, I belong to a group that's kind of like a content review group of a bunch of guys I respect, and one of the things that came up yesterday is they're like, well, what percentage of transfer growth do you allow into a church plant? I'm kind of radical on this. I have a no Christians allowed rule unless you start off with our core team, and unless you either live in the neighborhood or you're moving to the neighborhood, then I lessen it a bit. And that goes up and down, because sometimes when you're reaching lost people, you need more hands on deck. And so if I do have someone come, I vet them. But the key is that you're seeing people that are converts. So here's the deal. When I see a parking lot suddenly, like we were in Orange County church plant. We were predominantly a white parachute jump into a black and Hispanic area with Refuge Long Beach. And I can remember the day I came to the parking lot and I'm like, oh, no one's here, which is typical. For those of you church planners, that can be something you're always looking at the parking lot going, dang. But the reality was I rounded the corner where we meet. There's tons of people, but they had been walking. They just walked in from the neighborhood. And I remember that was kind of, to me, an indicator that, okay, this is the Lord at work here, because we're losing our Orange County white people and we're gaining the Hispanic and black community that are walking in from the neighborhood, from the street. And so I think that's what you're looking at, is you're looking at conversions. You're looking at the number of people that are coming in that you know for a fact they would not have been there worshiping God if you had not shown up. So, you know, and Pete, don't feel you got to ask me questions, because Pete, I know your gears are turning as you're thinking about Long Beach, and we can of course refer to that. It's just what you and I know, but you know, gosh, man, if I were on here with a Welsh guy, we talk about the other stuff. Maybe some of you guys, you've noticed this. But here's the need: the seating capacity in you know, in American Protestant churches. Here's the deal: the average seating of each church is 240 people. That's how much the average church in America can actually seat. So multiply that by 300,000 churches, right? That would give you 72 million seats available. And let's say that each of those churches, those 300,000 churches, run 3 services. I should have put a slide up on this. That means that you've got a total seating capacity now. You've multiplied 72 million seats by 3 for 3 services. You've now got 216 million seating capacity every Sunday morning. Now, the population of America is 310 million. So you're almost 100 million under. That was if we filled all those churches, ran 3 services. We're still 100 million if we were going to reach 100% of the population. So we are minus 216 million seating capacity. That leaves 94 million people to be turned away if all of our churches were full and running 3 services. That's just a mind-blowing statistic right there. So
yeah, because our churches are not full and they're not running 3 services a week.
Yeah. So as I'm looking at, there's like a whole side conversation going in here about apartment life. That's an awesome movement, and I want to talk a little bit about these different models because some people, and we'll get to this eventually. Someone asked, "What was your model?" The model it's going to change. And for me, I'm kind of like the Malcolm X philosophy of church planting, by any means necessary. And by that, I don't mean I get violent, but we're in a time and age where it's not about me building my thing, right? You can hear pastors, they stand around, they talk kind of like it's men in the locker room looking at their naughty bits, right? Like, hey, check out my hey, look at the size of my mega church, or look at and maybe another guy pops up to the guy who's talking about thousands of people at his mega church. And he goes, well, because he doesn't have that big of a church, but he's planted maybe 4 churches. And he's like, hey, I planted 4 churches. We have 8 satellites. And another guy goes, oh, yeah, we have 30 missionaries, 12 satellites, and we planted X amount of churches in X amount of years. And it can actually end up being, kind of a way that guys are kind of ego bumping, right? There's a bit of ministerial chest bumping. It's not about that. Right? If it's about anything other than the gospel, then you're blowing it. When one of my buddies asked me, he goes, hey, how biblical is this model? Sounds like a pyramid scheme model. Leaves one feeling like a failure when it does fail. 70% of church plants fail. He says, I've seen variations of multiplication models introduced to churches for the purpose of evangelism. How's this different? How do you determine success or failure of this model? And this is what I wrote. I think what this addresses is kingdom expansion, right? Paul planted every 3 to 4 months. When you do the math, and it's absolutely unmistakable from reading the epistles, he did it with a network of trained up individuals that he trained, right? And he trained them on the road. The key is discipling people. So again, what Brad said earlier about, hey, I think evangelism and discipleship go together. I agree. Do you really disciple people on mission? That's where people really get discipled. So like when they turn up, for teaching one day, the 72, and they're like sitting at Jesus' feet like, teach us, teacher, disciple us. And he goes, right, go into all the cities of Judea. I'm of the opinion that you cannot disciple people unless they're on mission. And so church plants become the massive mega tool for equipping people and discipling people. So I'm always beating on that drum all the time. We were with Hugh Halter a couple days ago, and he was saying, when you get to the heavenly gates, God's not going to ask you like, so what'd you do? And you look at him and you're like, hey, God, did you see how big I made that church? I took it from like 100 and I turned it into 5,000. And he was just saying how Jesus is going to be like, nice, that's cute. Well, Lord, did you see how many churches I planted? He'd be like, well, that's cool, but I didn't ask you to do that. What I actually asked you to do was to preach the gospel and make disciples. And so that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything that is going beyond what's written. We're not asking people to sign on to some kind of some trend. There's Trinity topics. Everyone's talking about discipleship right now. That is the Trinity topic. But these things are connected. And so when you focus on evangelism and discipleship, Jesus says, I'll build my church. Boom.
Cool. So what about discipleship, though? How does that, get worked into the church plant, to the, the movement, to the just being on mission?
Yeah, I think if you guys have your Bibles, it's good to crack the Bible every once in a while, guys. It's not very popular. You go to a conference, hardly anyone cracks a Bible. But we got to talk about the Bible for a second here. Um, when you're talking about this, you need to understand that um, Paul was the guy, man. He was basically he was a church planting master, right? He says, I laid a foundation like a wise and expert builder. Check this out. 2 Timothy chapter 2. You then, my child, be strengthened in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. That right there is a church planting gold mine. Everything you do ought to be based on the grace of God. That's another topic for another day. But this now. This is church multiplication. 2 Timothy chapter 2:2. This is the church multiplication verse. He says, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So here's the deal. What Paul is doing is he's made something simple and reproducible, right? He's not like, hey guys, we got to multiply as many campuses as we can, blah, 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 blah. No, he's multiplying people here. And of course, when you multiply people, like we were talking about the interns, they need something to do. They need a place to go, and that they're going to find it. So if they can't go upwards, they need to go outwards. That's what multiplication is. First multiplication movement came out of Jerusalem because the Apostle Paul was a church planter before he knew it, right? He opens up a can of persecution up on the church, and he basically gives them the smackdown, and it spreads them out, right? So when Paul says, what you've heard from me, that's first generation. Paul is first generation church planter. He's been in Antioch for a year. And so we're going to see 4 generations in this passage. If you are paying attention to what we're saying here, there's four generations. Number one, what you've heard from me, first generation, that's Paul. He's the planter. In the presence of many others, that's second generation, because Timothy was a part of those guys. He's saying, you heard it in the presence of others. So Paul was standing in a crowd, or Timothy was standing in a crowd at one point, and Paul's saying, hey, you were standing with those guys. You heard it together. Now, third generation, I want you to entrust that to faithful men. So this is the next. Now, Timothy is on the road, on the mission field, and he is going to a third group of people. That is third generation. And then Paul says, who are able to teach others also. That is fourth generation. So that is the multiplication movement right there that Paul has hardwired into that verse. Paul's not thinking just my church plant right now. Paul's hardwired it in from the beginning. And I remember we had a businessman in the church planning hub in Refuge. And from day one, I told the church, this is one of the things you can do. You sow the vision from day one. This church won't always be here in the way that you know it. We are going to be pouring out of this church. We're going to sometimes take our best guys and we're going to send them out. Imagine that Jerusalem sent Peter, it sent John, James stayed, but it sent 2 of their best guys out. And then Paul's your church planter. He plants in he plants anywhere he goes, and including Antioch sends out Paul and Barnabas. Those are their 2 best guys, and they plant them out. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at taking sometimes your best guys, and I tell my church, expect this, because this is what's going to happen. We are literally going to, you're going to have to make sacrifices as a church. You're going to lose some of the people you've grown close to, the leaders you've gotten the most from, but what was good here needs to go somewhere else too. And then you guys become, to the next generation, what we were to you. I mean, that's really up in the ante, right? Jesus was a leaver. I always tell people, he was a leaver. Bye, men of Israel, why do you stand looking up? Get busy. Get busy doing it now. Reach the world for Jesus. You've got the gospel. You've got the power of the resurrection. Don't stand dwelling on the ascension. Get busy. Get to work. Wait for the Holy Spirit's empowering and go. So they get on their faces before God and they cry out because they don't feel up to the task. There needs to be that tension. I think any of you that have church planted first time, you don't feel up to the task. First time you stood in a pulpit preaching, you weren't up to the task. First time you shared the gospel with someone, you weren't up to the task. And so we've always got to be calling and discipling people into this role where they're not up to the task, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So just, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Pete.
No, I dig it.
So can you give a couple of examples, Paul says, of how 2 Timothy chapter 2 breaks down practically in planting churches? Yeah, that's important. The Welsh guy just told me to slow down and not talk so fast. So here's the deal. Yes, if I were a church planter, let's see. Let's just take Reuben. I mentioned Reuben earlier. Let's take Reuben. I take Reuben, and right away I start training. This is the last thing I was going to talk about, but I suppose I could talk about it now. Let's say I take Reuben and Mike and Jimbo and Charlie, and these are going to be my church planters in the future. And this is how it worked out in Long Beach. And I would take people, by the way. I would tell them, if you come with me, I'll train you to plant your own church. And that's what Paul did, right? So Paul, just think of it now. He leads Timothy to faith, and on his first missionary journey. So in Lystra and Derbe, Iconium, around that area. And Paul goes throughout the region, and he comes back on a second journey. Now, his second journey, he's left elders in place, and they have grown to a level of maturity together as a family, all brand new Christians. Now, that's something to think about. Usually when the Holy Spirit's on the move, Paul spent 3 to 4 months in each church plant. If you look at the time it took to travel, if you look at the fact that Paul only had 11 years before he's beheaded, between the time that Barnabas knocked on his door in Tarsus and said, hey, come over to Antioch, I need help. He had 11 years to plant anywhere from 13 to 23 churches, is what scholars say. Some of them are debatable, what role he had. We know that he directly planted 12 to 13. He indirectly or maybe directly planted about 10 more that we have evidence for. So in order to just take that, he had to move rather quickly because, he came back to Jerusalem, he did a lot of other traveling, and he only had 3 missionary journeys that are recorded. So on his second missionary journey, he comes back, and during that year that's intervened between his first and second missionary journey, Timothy's been growing in the faith. And Paul comes back through, and he sees Timothy, and Timothy's got Jewish roots and Gentile roots, and Paul's like, I can use that. Because he's known the Scripture from his youth, so he knows the Scripture really well, but he's also a Gentile, at least half of one. And so he says, look, I need to take you. He's not circumcised. He says, I need to take you. I need to use you. During the intervening year of my first and second missionary journey, I had this problem with the Galatians. And I really need to make the focus of my ministry to be getting away from circumcision. I really need you. We need to go to the uncircumcised. That's what I'm called to. And so I just always picture Paul looking at Timothy and saying, hey, Timothy, you want to go on an adventure? Come with me. And Timothy's like, okay, and so he takes him. Now, remember, on his first missionary journey, John Mark and Barnabas were there. Barnabas, his nephews, John Mark. John Mark takes off. He turns back. So Paul's being very selective now in who he can train. Just so you guys know, this. You cannot disciple everybody equally in your church plant. You can't. And so you've got to be selective. And I think Paul was looking at Timothy like he was careful. He's a little bit more seasoned now. He knew the guys that would make it and the guys that wouldn't, right? The guys who were just flash in the pan and the guys that were like, hey, I can endure hardship like a good soldier. I work occasionally with a guy named Don Overstreet. He's part of the Southern Baptists. He's the catalyst for LA. He's been directly and indirectly involved in 500 church plants over 50 years. And I love Don because when we first met, we we chatted about it, and he said, I knew from day one you were like an apostolic church planner. You just would move around. Apostolic meaning a guy on the move, not Pope hat and denominational, but a guy who's mobile. And he said, I can look at a guy now who tells me I want to plant a church, and I can just tell you're not going to make it. And so, so going back to Paul's question, 2 Timothy 2:2. So Paul takes Timothy and he trains him on the road. And so maybe during the second generation is he's taking him now as he makes a swing back through Asia Minor on his second missionary journey and then into Asia. He's now got Timothy, and Timothy's with him now, going to all these, in the presence of many witnesses. He's preaching it. And so he's discipling him on mission as they go. And so very practically, I want to come down to say that when you're training a guy, you got to take him with you. As you're discipling others, that guy needs to be with you, watching you disciple other people. And so then on the third example, he's sending him out. So when he says, find other men, this is the next, he sent him out. So I send guys out. So Ruben, for example, is in San Pedro, and I am still on the team in Long Beach. I only travel there once a month. I've just done 3 weeks in a row because part of the team was gone and there was a gap. But yeah, you basically, I'm still there. I'm like his training wheels. So he's the first time doing it, but I'm like Paul. I'm writing him letters. We have a Tuesday afternoon conference every week where we chat, and I am involved with this Facebook group. I watch what he does. I mentor him. I coach him. I tell him, oh, that was awesome what you did there. We debrief. We forward plan. We strategize together, and I'm there for him. So he's not completely alone. He can bounce really stupid ideas, crazy ideas that will work off me, crazy ideas that should not be attempted because they're not crazy, they're stupid, and that's how it works. And so, but the fourth generation, I'll be completely gone. I won't even be there anymore. So when he says, entrust now to other men who are able to entrust to others, Reuben will then be in the role that I am to him, in that role to others. But I'll still be there too. I'll be like a grandpa, I'll be around. I'll visit that church occasionally. But that's where Paul writes Thessalonica, and he says, hey, the gospel through you has gone out into all the region, right? He writes that to them, that they've seen your sincerity of faith, your zeal, your this, so much so that the gospel's gone to all the region. If you really pay attention, you'll notice that so many of the churches that Paul writes to, he writes to the churches in that region, the churches that are in Galatia, the Corinthian churches, not just the church that's in Corinth, but it's the surrounding areas. The churches that are in the dispersion, James writes to. So many of these churches, it wasn't one. To the churches that are in Rome, Paul wasn't writing to one church. He was writing to multiple churches. There was a church planting movement that was going on. It wasn't just, hey, we're in this city. I was part of a denomination years ago that that's how it was. There was a brand name. You were the brand name of that city. And if another guy, some young upstart came and said, well, that city has a lot of people. There's like 1 million people in this city. Are you sure you want to stand before God and give an account for all those souls? You kept people out. Hey, we're here. Don't bring the brand here. That's creepy, right? That's empire building. A church planter wants to, what he sees is there's lost people there. They need to be reached. I'm only one dude. My biggest frustration as a church planter is I have but one life to live. I have a body, right? I'm incarnational. I'm limited. Incarnational is not cool to me. Incarnational is uncool to me because it means I want to reproduce. So out of my frustration, I reproduce myself. So the work goes beyond me because I inhabit a physical body and I need the work to go faster and further than I can personally take it. Want to read to you really quickly about a guy named Irby, who was a planter. His name's actually Gary Irby. He's a Southern Baptist up in Seattle. And I'll read to you from Viral Churches. It says, as a young minister in Washington State, Irby had served a church that was growing, albeit slowly. He had become frustrated with himself and with God. He said he prayed and did the things he needed to grow the church, but it just wasn't happening. So some of you guys are going to hit like a wall, and you're going to be knocking your brains out to try to make your church big. And what I love is in Church Planter magazine, we had an article by a guy named Carl Vaders, who said, or Vaders, however you pronounce it, who said, is your church stuck, or is it just small? A lot of guys think their church is stuck. And some churches, God just wants them to be small. But rather than spending all your time and energy trying to make your small church big, why not spend your energy trying to plant out from yourself, right? Because what I've always found with smaller churches is when they plant out, if they carve 20 people away from a group of 80, 20 more people come in. In fact, often that is the missional impetus, kind of the almost like kick-starting the bike that gets the motor humming for mission, and that church starts to change. But rather than trying to be big, just keep going out, and God it creates a vacuum, and the Holy Spirit fills it. I don't know what the science is of that. The Holy Spirit's like the wind. Can't figure him out. Wish I could sell you a system, but he hasn't packaged himself. He won't let me sell him like water. I can't bottle him up. You know, it's not like Holy Spirit sparklets. He does this, and part of your journey as a church planter is learning to walk with him and allow him to disciple you in this, because sometimes we got our eyes on the total wrong things, and sometimes the Holy Spirit's just like, hey, knucklehead, you're looking in the wrong area. I'm trying to do this in your community, and you won't stop looking at like Mark Driscoll or Chuck Smith or whoever it was and whatever they did, because you think you got to be them, and I'm totally trying to do something totally different. And so anyways, going back to Gary Irby, Southern Baptist up in Seattle, God said to me very clearly, the clearest I've ever heard him, Gary, you've been adding. It's time to start multiplying. In other words, what God meant was that it was my turn to get involved in church planting. And then Stetzer and Bird write, Irby has done just that. During his 20 years as a church planter, 11 of them in Seattle, Irby has been answering God's call to multiply. He's trained other church planters to do that as well. A new church planter needs to start with the next 1 or 2 planters already on his team. So that's it, man. It's that simple. You just pick the couple guys with you and you train them to plan out. You don't use them like a pastor uses interns to build your personal empire. You invest in them. And I always tell guys that train with me in New Breed, I always say, look, I'm not going to use you. I promise you I won't use you. But don't use me. Right? Don't use me as a stepping stone to get where you're going. This is relational, this is friendship, but I'm not going to use you. Don't use me, right? We're in this for the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God has to trump all of our personal agendas. But I don't have one. I'm not like using them to build my thing. And so I ask them, invest while you're here with all your heart. Don't use me, because you can tell when a guy's using a church plant to get where he's going. He's a hireling. And so I just tell him, just serve Jesus here, man. And when you're done, boom, go on. And one of the questions coming through from Paul right now is, would these be Bivo guys? Yes. They don't have to be, but yes. I love what Hugh Halter said in his book, Bivo. He says, I'm of the persuasion. He convinced me. It's how it's worked for me. I've always been Bivo. Except for when I was on staff at a megachurch. I went backwards in my training. I started that way, and then I eventually became a missionary. 9/11 hit, my support dropped in half, had to work in a factory. People started getting saved there. I was like, hey, this is cool, right? But I love what Hugh Halter said. He said, you should not be paid full-time to do ministry unless you are reproducing yourself. That's the only reason anyone ought to be paying you to do what you do, is to be set apart as a disciple to make disciples. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Irby went on to say, when there are 4 or 5 church plants, I could spend significant time with each planter and his family, even playing the role of the occasional babysitter so the planting couple could have a date night. As we've grown to over 80 new churches in our region, assisted the planting of many more churches throughout the Northwest, and helped develop networks in many more partners of North America, that level of intimacy with each church planting family is impossible to obtain. So with the church planting movement, they lose control. And they lose the ability to, it's like a general, right? He can't interact with every single soldier. He cares for every soldier, but he can't interact, right? And it's not hierarchical. Please don't misunderstand me on that. But listen to what he says. In order to grow to the next level, I must invest more and more time in those who invest in others, who invest in the individual church planters, and not as much in each church planter directly. For a highly relational grace giver such as myself, that is a difficult but necessary task. I just think you have to you have to let go at a certain point. I see Paul letting go. He checks back in with him, but can you imagine Paul, like the amount of faith it took when he says, like, you know, I was like your mother, I birthed you. He has to leave his baby. You know, they're like 3-4 months old. Thessalonica, 2 weeks he has to leave them. Two Sabbaths are recorded in the book of Acts until the circumcision group drives him on to the next town, and he has to leave his guys behind. Paul is persona non grata. He cannot stay in Thessalonica. There's a riot that started, and so he's in the next town over, and his boys are taking it. So you know, they're you know, kicking butt and taking names, so much so that they become a reproducing church plant, if that makes sense. And I saw a question. I want to just go back to it. Let's see. Could you please go back and hit on a few points concerning the hub startup days, especially related to the core team? Okay, great question, Philip. When you're planning a hub, you have to sow into the vision that you were going to be a church planting church. I don't know how to tell you that is so healthy for churches to get that, to understand that the DNA is a church planting church. So I constantly tell them, Pete, do you remember some of the crazy stuff? Because Pete, you were there in the very beginning, right? Back when we were kind of in the incubator and Emmanuel. And do you remember all the crazy stuff I was saying back then?
I don't remember the crazy stuff that you were saying because I didn't really think it was all that crazy, but I remember Charlie was freaking out at the stuff you were saying.
Yeah, Charlie was like my seatbelt, you know. He'd kind of be like, hey, slow down, Turbo, because I was telling them all, like, hey, you know, you guys should all go to other churches, you know, because this is going to be a bumpy ride. You're going to see heroin addicts throwing up in the middle of the service. You're going to, because they're withdrawing. And we haven't had them barfing. I've had that before, but we've had guys laying down. I remember one guy.
We've had totally drunk people standing up next to the guy preaching.
Yeah, we once had someone rush the pulpit, but you know, it's been crazy, man. And I tell people, look, this is not for the faint of heart. And I would give them vision. I would constantly tell them what they're going to see. Now, I'm a word-based guy. I was raised in Calvary Chapel, but I hit the mission field. And missionaries have the best stories because they're taken out of their comfort zone. Well, the cool thing about being taken out of your comfort zone is you need the comforter to turn up, right? He doesn't comfort the comfortable. So when you go out frontline on the mission field, you tend to see the Holy Spirit stuff, supernatural. So I could go with full confidence. I came into Long Beach and I'm like, hey, by the way, you guys are going to see, you're not just going to read about the book of Acts. You're going to be in the book of Acts. You're going to actually live this stuff. You can read about it, you can live it. I promise you, if you stay with us, you're going to see the supernatural. You can't help it. You're going to see this stuff. So I would sow the vision and freak some people out and they'd leave. Others would be like, yeah, I'm bored, man, as a Christian, and I need to see that. So, but I would tell them too, I'd threaten them, Paul, or excuse me, I don't remember who it was now. Yeah, I'm confusing all you guys. But I would say things like, but some of you are going to be going, and some of you are going to be leading. Now, one of the things that I do, if you read Church Zero, cha-ching, I think that's the first time I mentioned it. It's a book I wrote with David C. Cook. Our rule is you have to say cha-ching. One of the things I mentioned there is our church in Europe was interactive. So we started out of a Starbucks, and I learned a secret to reaching lost people, that if church is interactive, non-believers have a chance to really ask the stuff they're thinking. And when I looked at the New Testament, it was interactive. But anyways, going beyond that, I also learned that it disciples Christians, because I can't be in every group. They got to take it. And once we laid down the ground rules, we started finding that people suddenly are leading people to Christ in their group. I did once pull a Jesus on people and send out the 72. I told them to come with Thanksgiving sandwiches the weekend after Thanksgiving, and I sent them out into this park that we were meeting at, and they led people to Christ. They came back crying. People had seen things. They had never led someone to Jesus, and it was just cool, man. So mission, part of discipling, but yeah, man, I tell them from the beginning, and I tell them they're going to be busy. I will not let church be an audience. We don't sit in rows. We sit around tables. We feed the community. And when you're sitting around, everybody's involved. When you're in rows, people are watching the show. They're an audience. When people are in circles, they got to participate. And the more I read the New Testament, the more I see it's an interactive sport. It's not a participatory sport. So I lost where we are, man. Pete, I'm way off the grid.
Yeah, but that's normal for you.
It very much is.
So let me hit then on a couple of these questions here. Let's see. What system or method do you use? That's an interesting question. So talking about models, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let me back up real quick, because here's the deal. For a model, again, the model is irrelevant as long as you understand some of the key principles of church planning. At around 130 people, Rick Warren planted his first church, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, he's the opposite of, like a house church or missional church or whatever. He's actually not. If you study that dude pretty closely, he's planted a church every year from year one. Wayne, real quick, are you suggesting that in church the lead pastor should not be paid a living wage or full-time salary? No. Paul gives you perfect justification for taking a wage, but you got to earn it, right? You got to earn it, man. Like, you got to reproduce yourself. You got to take it beyond you. It's not there to make you comfortable. It's not there for you. It's there so you can empower and equip. I remember Timothy. The whole reason of Timothy, he's writing him to equip the other generation, just to set a church up right. And Timothy wasn't going to stay there. Timothy was going to move on. Paul had an interchangeable team of 34 dudes that he talks about in the New Testament, and they're all moving around. So they're a mobile ministry. So that's what I would say you need to do, is you need to earn it. If you're going to take that paycheck, you need to reproduce yourself. And statistically, if you don't plan out within your first 6 years, you never will. That's what the statistics tell us. So from year one, I would do it. And the way that you do it is you use new believers, right? We all know that we should ride the coattails of new believers. New converts make new converts. So use them. Don't use them to lead the team, but put them on a new team. Let them from day one get the benefits of house church, the benefits of small groups, the benefits of discipleship, so you don't reproduce a bad church culture where people just sit in rows. So that right away, taking believers who don't have to relearn the from the bad way to the right way, but actually start off from day one. They get it, man. Those of you that are in ministry, most likely, and you're discipling others, most likely you were discipled by others. And so that's kind of a key deal. When I see a new believer come to faith, I'm thinking automatically, like, mate, you have no idea what God's going to do. I'm automatically thinking, what church plant can I put this guy in? And Paul used new believers. Think of it this way. 3 to 4 months in one area, planting a church in each church plant, he had to use new believers. So when he came back a year later, they were new. And the way he did it was he worked in teams. So Jesus picked a team of 12. He collected them. As he came back through, he collected them, put them on teams. So not one guy had to be the guy fully developed. He used guys in teams. And of course, you see Ephesians 4, his model about different roles on those teams. You got an evangelistic guy. You got a guy who's really good at teaching. You got a guy who's a shepherd, who's really good at counseling people and discipling people. You got an apostolic guy, which means he's a nutcase like me. He's just always thinking, let's go plant more, let's go plant more. And then you got a prophetic guy. We don't talk about him that much, but a prophetic guy is the guy who looks around and goes, hey, man, this stinks of man too much. Where's God? Where's the power? Are we praying for people to get healed? You know, is the Lord speaking into our service? Are we hearing the voice of God? Let's cut the crap. Let's cut the red tape. And so that's how that goes. But remember, Jesus picked a team. He picked a team of 12 because he was going to replace himself. He didn't replace himself with one guy. He reproduced himself in 12. And those guys handled Jerusalem. And when the persecution came, they could send out a chunk of them. There was still plenty left. Some of you guys believe in a plurality of leadership. I guess we all do. Everyone believes there should be elders. It depends on what we think. For me personally, that's Ephesians 4. And if you notice the 12 in Jerusalem, their mission directive was to spread out. The first thing they do is they recruit 7 more guys and train them up. And they say, wow, now we're 19. You know, and some of those guys are not just like interns, right? Those 7 guys are Stephen, the first martyr, Philip, the evangelist. These are some power players, man. So they're training these guys. They start off serving, but you can tell these guys are like the future missionaries. These are the future apostles getting sent out. And by the way, 9 other people are called apostles, which shows us we're not talking the 12. The 12 were the 12, right? That's why they're called the 12. So there's only 12 of them. But there was a role. There was a function of guys who traveled out, right? Some stay behind, some travel out. So you're training guys to either replace you when you leave, or you're training guys to be the ones that you send. And if you're using a Moses model where like there's one dude at the top of a pyramid, it's just not going to work, right? It didn't work in the first century church. It's not how they did it. They put teams of guys. Titus, by the way, is the church planting book of the New Testament. And he tells them, go and appoint elders in every city on the Isle of Crete, and then come back to me. You imagine that? Every city in Southern California, it's yours. Or every city in the state of Louisiana, it's yours. Every city, you know, just giving shouts out for my boys in Louisiana, but every city needs to have a team, is what Paul's telling them. And so if you use a team approach and something happens, a guy gets caught up in a scandal, or you're caught off the plant, the work doesn't implode because you've reproduced your DNA in a group of guys, and that was what Jesus did. And that's the key, man. Does that make sense?
It does. I dig it, man. I dig it.
All right. Well, cool. Well, let me just keep talking a little bit more. How are we doing on time, Pete? We're approaching the end of this session, aren't we?
Yeah, we got about 17 more minutes before we talk about jump school. Let me just bring something up here real quick. With something that you and I shared, we did a podcast on Rick Warren. You and I had dinner, and we were sitting there with Rick Warren, and he just went off on a church planting. And Rick Warren is, you know, one of the biggest church planters there is. You know, most people think of him as this guy who's got this huge, you know, mega church, but his heart is totally church planting. And one of the ways that they penetrate the community is by the use of small groups. You know, you might even refer to them as house churches. In fact, he said, you know, really you could say he's got 7,000 churches because he's got 7,000 small groups that meet every week. And more people attend the small groups than attend the weekend services. And do you remember the story he talked about where they had a guy who had a church plant, and it had like 20 people at it. And so he did what Rick said. And Rick said, on Sunday, ask people who will volunteer their home for a small group. And he had like 15 people volunteer to host a small group. And so, Rick's like, well, what did you do? I mean, you only have 20 people and you got 15 people hosting a small group. He goes, well, I made them all small group leaders. And, 30 days later, our church was 75 people in size because they used those small groups to invite their non-Christian friends, and their non-Christian friends would happily go over their house.
Absolutely.
I remember that story in relation to what we're talking about. And
that's one of the major things, Pete, is empowering, like what you would call, I mean, I'm not a big lover of the separation of clergy and laity. We're to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So it's not like, right now we pay leaders to do the ministry for us. So we chuck money at them. We're like, you're the professional. That's not the biblical model. The biblical model is if I'm paid, it's to reproduce. It's to equip others to do the work. So what Warren did is he empowers these guys to plant, really, house groups. He gave them the power. He basically did what Jesus did to the 12 and turns to them and goes, well, it's up to you and the Holy Spirit. Imagine if every single person, and I think sometimes Mama Bird needs to push the little chickie out of the nest sometimes. That's what I did to my church. When they showed up that Sunday morning, we were on Matthew 10, and I just did it. I didn't teach on it. I spoke on it about 5-10 minutes and said, right, guys, go into this park. It was a park we were meeting at. He said, go talk to people. I'll see you in 40 minutes. And people are like, what? And they're looking at me like in shock and horror. And I go, that's the look right there that they must have been given to. I was laughing. I was punking them. But, the reality is that, that's what people need. And that's what he did. And this brings up the whole idea of satellite campuses. Ironically, satellite campuses in America tend to discourage discipleship. So in other words, what it's become, like I said, is guys comparing their naughty bits in the locker room. A guy grows a big church and then goes, you know what the world needs? More of me. And I know some people are going to say, no, you got it wrong. And I know that's a narrow. I'm saying the danger of it, right? I'm not saying that is what it is. I'm saying the danger of it is it can become that. We all know that. So then suddenly the guy's like, I got 10 giant screens of me. And so the guy that is there, maybe he just does a bunch of counseling and visiting, but the teaching is all done by, Big Brother, on the screen. 1984, George Orwell, he's watching you every Sunday morning. And so the irony of that is that the satellite campus idea started through Rick Warren on the mission field. So, for example, what would happen is he would go down and speak, say in Brazil, and he would be like, they need churches down here, and I don't have the time to start up. So what he would do is he would get a translator, translate one of the things he did presenting the gospel, and then he would ask people to host this, Bible study with him translated, because he couldn't expect them to have the gifting. But like you said, people were much more ready to host something. And so what would happen is, he said, say if we had 20 people starting out doing the movie, it got a kick-started. And he said, and what would happen is maybe out of those 20 groups of satellite home groups, in a couple of months, somebody would take it on, and we might have 3 of them survive and the other 17 die, but now we've got 3 church plants. And so it was out of his frustration that he could not reach more people in foreign countries, and that's a lot of people don't know what he does in missions. This is not a paid commercial for Rick Warren. It's just, I hear people criticize that guy so much, and as I've looked at what he's done in world mission, that's where he's impressive. That's where he's really impressive to me, because I'm not a big mega church guy. I am a missions guy. And by the way, that's a train goes by my house. But that's how it started. And so it was actually a way to equip guys and to see them emerge as gifted leaders who wouldn't need videos. And it was a bit of his Gamaliel approach, where Gamaliel's like, hey, if it's of the Lord, it'll survive. If it doesn't, it won't. And that brings up the fear of failure. If you're going to be a part of a multiplication movement, you can't be afraid to fail. Churches are idolatrous, in America at least, about success, right? If what you do doesn't succeed, you are branded as a failure. In a New Breed, we say something. If you've seen our video, we train church planners. It's like a dub of 300, the film with Clive, whatever his name is. And the only failure is the one who never tried, is kind of the tagline at the end, because the guy goes, what if you fail? And he says the only failure is the guy who never tried. The old saying, you'll never fail if you never start, is true. And I think with church planners, you have to get over the idolatry of success. And I know for a fact, I traveled through Turkey. I've stood in places where Paul has preached, because I remember traveling through Turkey with the book of Acts. It wasn't a religious tour. We just hit a bunch of places. And I remember opening my Bibles going, oh, we're here. And it says he went into the marketplace and preached, and there was no church there. So not everything that Paul did was a success. It was an evangelistic phenomenon. But other places, he went, he did the same thing, he preached the gospel, and it popped, and a church came. So evangelism always pulls church planting. Remember, we're called to preach the gospel and disciple. We're not actually told to plant churches. So what system and model? I don't care. Like, that doesn't matter to me. Ed Stetzer pointed out that Calvary Chapel, which is a movement I grew up in, was the most prolific church planting movement of the 20th century. And the amazing thing about that is that none of them were trained. All of them were a bunch of like hippie, ex-druggies, and talk about hippies trying to organize something, please, right? They just don't do it. And God leads differently in different circumstances through different methods. I don't care what you do. Right now, the church plant that I'm doing, the hub I planted looks nothing like the last hub I planted. One started out of a Starbucks, and we met around a coffee table, and it catered to the middle class. Eventually that changed. The other one started from day one, scary as all get out, in public space in inner city Long Beach, with all kinds of radical stuff. In 2.5 years, I did 5 exorcisms. It's gnarly. And so Ian Bounds once said, men are always looking for methods, but God is looking for men. And I would add for women too, because on teams you got women, and that's super important. But the LA Church Planting Mission, give them a little shout out. They're doing a good work. They want to plant, and I think I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's either like 29 neighborhoods in the greater, if you know, text it up there, the greater Los Angeles area, or 33. And those two names jump out. And I probably made them both up. But they want to plant in every single one of those neighborhoods in the next few years. And they're doing a great job. And what they're doing is they're discipling. It's a network used to disciple all the church planters. Francis Chan, he goes into the Tenderloin, and there's tenement buildings, which are like high-rises, and he says, I want a church in every single one of these high-rises, and he knocks on the door and says, can I pray for you? And comes back a week or two later and says, did anything happen? We've been praying. And he wants to hear a story of the supernatural. And in the meantime, he says, what needs can we meet? Do you have any needs? Like, are you, and someone might say, well, I'm hungry. It's Tenderloin. It's a bad area. I can't pay my rent or whatever. And so he goes away, he prays for them. He also meets some of their needs, and he comes back. I mean, who would think to do these models, right? Someone mentioned apartment life. That's one model. Starting home study in your living room. That's another model. The big launch. That's another model that, other guys, run coaching networks, and they'll help you do a big launch. Pentecost is a big launch, right? Some people are like, oh, I don't believe in that. Well, Pentecost is a big launch. Jerusalem had a big launch. You just got to know that. I'm not a big launch guy. But I have a hard time with people knocking specific models because it's not what God called them to do. Just do what God's called you to do. That's the key. Attractional and missional, I'm both, right? Because I do back to front church. The missional model and the model, I guess, that I use more than anything is I use the home studies in the midweek to launch my churches. So, for example, let's go back to the earlier question. How do you do this? Like, how do you practically do the 4 generation thing from 2 Timothy 2:2? Well, looking at Travis's question, he says, can you be apostolic and be in one location? Yes. Let's say I stay. I'm the sender. Like, when I stay at a church, I'm eventually a leaver, so I'm a leaver and a stayer. I'm not going to stay 3 or 4 months. I might stay a number of years. My first hub, I stayed 5 years, but we started a church planting movement out of that. When I'm in Long Beach, I've only been there, I think, 2.5 years, and I have now left, but I'm still working within the network. But the secret sauce for me is I don't duplicate Sunday mornings. So I don't, like a lot of people are going back and forth between megachurch and house church. But we're kind of like, how do I put it? We're like a middle ground. We're not a megachurch. We're not a house church. We kind of take both approaches. An attractional model on a Sunday. Sunday's about outreach, so we have our centralized gathering. But then, kind of like Hugh Halter says, the gathered and scattered church, we scatter in the week into different neighborhoods. One of them meets in San Pedro. One of them meets in Long Beach. One of them meets in Westminster. So we're in different neighborhoods, and the hope is that eventually each one of those home studies will become a church plant. And so whereas like the traditional church, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I have, where the pastor's afraid of equipping and empowering home studies because he doesn't want it to break off and become a church. Let's face it, home studies are awesome, right? You get discipleship, you get everything that you could ever hope to get from church, you get in a small group. You just do. And especially if you make that group missional. That's a missional community. Josh just asked a question. What do you think? What are your thoughts on starting missional communities to plant churches? Yes. That's what I'm saying. Is I think of each home study that meets, and we tell our church, we're like, look, this is evangelism. It's not for you. It's evangelism on Sunday. It's about them. So we do everything to reach people outside. But in the midweek, when we have our home studies, that's where we take communion. That's where we have a prayer meeting. That's where we do all the stuff that we don't do on Sunday. But I see those really the great secret for me, and it's not such a secret, as I see those as little core teams that eventually could break off. And we're actually doing that with San Pedro. The Friday night Long Beach, we call it COG, it's a home study, stands for Community of Grace, is actually a core planting team that is now transplanting into San Pedro. And Ruben and I talked about this. We knew this way back then. We could almost predict when we announced the San Pedro team, we could almost predict who was going to go. And of course, if you got a guy who has a heart for San Pedro, leading a group of people in Long Beach, which it's like the backyard, he's going to say to his team, hey, I'm going to go plant. You guys want to go on mission together? It's Paul grabbing Timothy again. They know this dude. They trust him. They can't wait to get out there. And that's how it happens. So that's it. I would say use those COGs, use those home studies, plant out of them, see your church, use those as little incubators for your church plants to be. Does that make sense?
I dig it.
Cool! We're just about out of time, aren't we?
For this section of it, yeah.
Let me just close by reading something out of Romans 15. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but Romans 15. The more you read the scripture, the more it's a funny thing that the Bible. The more you read the scripture, the more you start seeing. You're like, I don't know about you guys, but when I started planning, I wasn't smart enough. I was not well versed enough in the Book of Acts to actually understand. Kind of like, how all this worked. I found myself reading Acts going, hey, I'm stupid enough to figure it out on my own, but it was the only thing that would work. And gosh dang it, what they're doing in the Book of Acts is what we're doing in Wales, because that's what will work. So I'm going to start with verse 14. Just listen to this through church planter eyes. And if you've never read the Book of Acts through church planter eyes, it is phenomenal. Listen to this. Paul says, I myself, he's writing to the Romans now, Romans 15, verse 14, I myself am satisfied with you, my brothers, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, and able to instruct one another. But on some points I've written you very boldly by way of reminder, because of the grace given me by God to be a minister of Christ Jesus of the Gentiles, and the priestly service of the gospel of God, so that the offering of the Gentiles may be acceptable, sanctified by the Holy Spirit. And then he says, in verse 17, in Christ Jesus, you never hear anyone saying this from a pulpit, right? But he says, in Christ Jesus, then, I have reason to be proud of my work for God. Have you ever heard anyone say, if you do, you're like, oh, there's something up with that guy? Listen to what he says. He's going to talk about the accomplishment. Listen what he says. For I will not venture to speak of anything except what Christ has accomplished through me to bring the Gentiles to obedience by word and deed, by the power of signs and wonders, by the power of the Spirit of God, so that, here's what he's going to tell you what has been accomplished, so that from Jerusalem all the way around to Illyricum, I have fulfilled the ministry of the gospel of Christ. He's basically saying, I was given this network to plant, and I did it. I finished my area. It's like he ticked a box. Done. Every major city in Paul's network, he planted in. So it's what you hear gateway cities. Some church planting movements are hitting gateway cities, they call them, because they know that they're the centers of culture, and they know that everything comes out of those cities, and so they plant there, like Paul did Corinth, like he did Rome, Jerusalem. These were all gateway cities. But Paul went out to all the major, he didn't go to every village. Jesus had the disciples go to every town, every village, and he made them come back when they're done. But Paul specifically targets gateways. But think of this now. Would the Apostle Paul that you know and love be content just to reach cities and not the areas, the towns and villages surrounding? No, you know he wouldn't. So what was Paul doing? In each city, Paul was creating a church planting movement. Just think about it. Ephesus becomes the hub, right? For the first time in Acts chapter 19, it says about Paul that he stays on his third missionary journey. You can trek his journeys, his 3 missionary journeys, and notice that the Apostle Paul actually changes. He learns as he goes. And so he plants hubs in the end of his ministry. He sets in one place and he trains guys out because he knows his time is short. And so in Ephesus, it says that in Ephesians chapter 19, that Paul lectures daily for 2 years in the hall of Tyrannus. Guys, what he's doing is he's reproducing himself. He is making church planters. The reason he's doing that is because they're going to go out from Ephesus, the church planting hub, and they're going to plant out into the surrounding region. Just let me ask you, Revelation chapter 2 and 3, the 7 churches of Asia, what's the first church listed? Ephesus. That was the hub. What are the other 6 churches? Scholars tell us that it goes in a spiral, right? Outward from Ephesus in the order of those letters to the 7 churches. I have read commentaries that have said, we don't know why they're in this order, but we see a geographical pattern. I'll tell you why. Because it was the order of expansion of a church planting movement, using Ephesus as the hub. Boom, I'm done.
I dig it, man. I dig it.
So, Pete, I want to talk about Jump School because, by the way, guys, one of the things that is important for you to know is that when we talk about discipleship and mentorship, Ed Stetzer said one thing in Viral Churches that really stuck with me, that church planters that have direct mentorship have 135% higher success rate in their survivability as a plant. Now, that is the uniting factor. That's what he brings out of it. He says guys who have what Timothy had from Paul, that mentorship, and what Titus had, and what Epaphroditus had, all those guys that Paul mentioned, Silvanus, that mentorship, those are the guys that survive. It will increase your chance by 135%. And so because of that, we've chosen to present Jump School. We're excited. It's been over 3 years in the making. And Pete, tell us a little bit about it, man.
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk somewhat about it, but you're going to have to fill in a lot of the blanks.
They need to hear you so they can see why they don't agree with you on anything.
And see, that's if you guys, if you have not been listening to the Church Planner podcast, you will not understand that inside joke. But there's a battle raging on Twitter with hashtags I do agree with Pete and I don't agree with Pete. So I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, Jump School is, first of all, it's an online training course and a community for church planners that are in the trenches. And basically what we're doing with Jump School is it provides all the training you need to plant your first church. Plus, obviously, true to this webinar, it will teach you from day one how to become a multiplication movement. So who is this for? Well, first of all, it's for you. It's for church planners who haven't started yet. It's for church planners who are about ready to launch. It's for church planners who have already launched, and it's for pastors that are looking to plant out of their current church. And that's actually, we've had a lot of pastors come to us because you know, they want to know how do we plant out. I mean, that's not been maybe even how they got their church. And then it's for your Nana. I don't know what that's all about, Peyton.
I put that in there because basically it's for anybody. You've heard me talk about it already. It's for equipping the saints. I mean, really, you know, it's kind of like where Moses goes, "Would to the Lord that all his people were prophets." I don't think we got to hide the goodies, man. I think we got to chuck goodies at people, and you know, we think of ministerial training. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe strongly in leadership. Leadership exists. You hear guys right now, they're like, oh, no, there's not. Well, that's what Ephesians 4 is. It's leadership. But ministry's for everybody. But the reality is people will emerge as leaders, others won't, and you know that. When an accident, I was a firefighter, when an accident happens, natural leaders just run up and start helping the people. Other people pull out their phones and record the event. You know what a leader is, and in a church situation, it's no different. But every single person, if you're a church planner, definitely for you. If you're a guy who thinks about church planning, definitely for you. But if you've never planned or you just are going to be a part of a team, it's good for you too. And we've incorporated that in. So I just want people to understand it's for everybody.
So the reason why we're doing Jump School this way is, you've heard Peyton mention the New Breed network that he runs, and one of the drawbacks to New Breed is New Breed requires you to come to us, and we take you on mission and get you plugged in. In fact, right now on the webinar we got Barry, who's from Wales, and he came all the way from Wales. He's going to be out here the next 6 months training with Peyton, with New Breed, on how to do it. And most people can't do that. I mean, he's young and stupid, so that's why he did it. but he's single too. I mean, if you got a family, you may not be able to do that.
Any church planning ladies on here? Very single.
That's right. Wasn't it his family who said he's supposed to come back with a wife or something like that?
Yeah, I actually put that on his list of, you know, his personal goals and objectives for this time with us before we send him back to plant. And I put there the last thing, and he told me, I don't know if I can do much about that one. So well, we'll see. You're not trying hard enough, Barry, but here's the deal. Pilgrim Benham, my buddy in Tampa Bay, serial church planner, church planning ninja. By the way, that's going to be my new site, PeytonJones.ninja, church planning ninja. Here's the deal. Are there any good materials to train apprentice future church planners? That's his question. Guys, honestly, I have joined a number of church planning courses for a couple months at a time because I wanted to know, like, what's out there for my guys, because I get asked all the time that question. How do I train? Where's the good materials? There's a lot of good books. In fact, part of what we're offering in Jump School is an essential reading list that you can, you know, grab, and we'll do like reviews of them, audio reviews. But when he says, are there any good materials, guys, the reason we're doing this is because the programs I joined one, and it was like someone's recycled conference audio. And I remember it was like, waitress, hello? Like, nobody was there to help me. I didn't even know, like, and it was a scheduled webinar, and if you missed it, that was it, right? And so it didn't help me. There was another one I did where it was like the guy had one model, and it was the big launch. And what he would do every week was try to fit you into his, or every month was fit you into his model. And he would send you things that you probably weren't really going to use in your context. It wasn't adaptable. It wasn't scalable. It was all about the big launch. Another network that I joined, the guy would send you graphics, and that was it. He'd be like, here's the package, here's the slides for your overheads, here's the campaign, you got to go print all this stuff up, and we'll put your church name in it. And I'm just like, that's not church planner training. Like, I get those are resources. Like, that's what our network does for each other. New Breed Network does that, where they share all that stuff. But that's not actually church planner training. So really, for me, guys, I see a whole, like what you heard today. I mean, I just noticed the comments. People are like, man, this is awesome. This is good stuff. This is legit. It's the real deal. You guys, and that's encouraging to me, because first thing I always say is nobody in this game is an expert. I don't care who you are. Each time I go to plan a church, it's like jumping out of the airplane for the first time, because I'm over a different jump zone. But I tell you what, if I've jumped a bunch of times, I know how to pack my parachute. I know how to do my safety checks, and that's where we're going to help you. We're going to be the Paul to you, to your Timothy. It's interactive. We will be there for you.
All right, let's keep moving in.
Yeah. Sorry,
we'll cover that stuff.
You're like, slow down, Turbo. I get excited about this. So.
Well, yeah, and we're going to cover it, and I want people to know what's involved in it. But we got a slide for that. Barry spent all that time putting the slide together, and you're like jumping in. So first of all, let's just hit it off. What does it cost? It's $147 a month, just to get that out of the way so everyone knows what it is. All right, so what's included? All right, if you're looking for graphics, advertising pieces, a short film on church planning, an audio interview of what it was like to plant a church 30 years ago, then this isn't for you. I love that slide. That one always makes me chuckle. So here's what's actually included in this. Exclusive audio lectures from Peyton's university courses on church planting. If you listen to the Church Planter podcast, you know he's also the Dean of Church Planting for Calvary University. And so we're including his lectures from his university courses on church planning.
Yeah, and I've got 8 courses, so they're all different, and they're extensive, man. One, I think, just the first class has like 20 lectures. We're not saying you'll get all of them, but it'll match the topic of that month.
Right. So the First Time Every Time Club, this is an exclusive interview with a newbie church planner. Essentially, it's a masterclass makeover where Pete and Peyton speak into his church plant. Really, Peyton speaks into the church plant. I just sit around and make snide comments and remarks.
Not true at all.
A curriculum to equip the planter. Coaching roundtable, where we're going to answer your church planning questions live on a monthly hangout call. So every month we're going to be diving deep specifically on your questions. Like even on this webinar, I was actually surprised at how many questions we had come in. Yeah. And we didn't.
Good questions, guys.
Yeah, we didn't even get a chance to get to them all. So we're going to be including.
There was a side. Did you notice the side conference going on?
I know. I did because I wasn't talking. I was like reading it all, and
there's like I was talking at one point and it started throwing me off because I'm like, wow, there's a whole other conference going on in those comments.
I know. So free subscription to Church Planter magazine after the current free subscription ends. Right now, our magazine is being sponsored. And when that ends, then it'll be a paid subscription. But for everyone in Jump School, they'll always get Church Planter magazine for free. And if you're not getting it right now, you do want to get it while it's being sponsored and paid for. So it's available on your iPad or your iPhone, or also in the Android store. Just look up Church Planter magazine, because we're the only ones. A monthly hot sheet from Peyton's Essential Church Planter Toolkit reading list for that month's topic. Monthly exclusive audiobook reviews from Pete and Peyton. Basically, we know what it's like for the Bivo guy because, Peyton is Bivo. I don't really consider myself in ministry. I'm just more like this guy who's, doing
running
all this stuff.
Until the whale swallows him up.
Pretty much. And you have to listen to the podcast to really understand that. But But we know what it's like when you've got a shortage of time, right? I mean, you're working, you're got your family, and you're starting a church. I mean, how do you have time to read all this stuff that's coming out there? So Peyton and I thought one of the easiest ways that we could help you guys out is we will. Anybody who listens to the podcast knows Peyton is an avid reader, and we're going to both read the books that we're talking about that month, and we're going to give you basically the executive summary on an audio format, so you guys can listen to that. This is not going to be part of Church Planter Podcast. This will be specific for Jump School people, so that way you can basically get the essence of the book if you don't have the time to actually read the whole book. So here's the course breakdown. Monthly live conference calls on Month 1, Intro to Biblical Church Planting. Church planting as it is in Acts. And by the way, Peyton, feel free to comment on any of these things if you want to go deeper on what we're going to be covering on these months. Month 2, Peyton calls it Boot Camp. The Planter's Calling, Character, and Gifting. Month 3, the Quartermaster, Preparation, Funding, and Support. That's like, of all of our podcasts, this is the topic on raising funds is always in the top 5 of our most downloaded podcasts. Month 4, the Terrain, Models, Strategy, Mapping, and the Spirit's Leading. Month 5, your squad, gathering your core team / vision and mission statements. Month 6, Ammo Check, gift-driven team stuff, leadership team dynamics, how not to burn people out, basic core values of a church plant. What would early church do? 3 things that need to happen. You're more important than anything you can do for me. These are all basically subtopics that we're going to be talking about in that month.
Yeah, these are kind of like mantras that, in order to survive a church plant, I'm not saying you got to have these mantras, but if you've planted and your church is done, you've been teaching things like this anyways. There's a certain culture. Maybe you haven't, and problems will come out of it if you don't. Every church has its problems, but these are things. I've been in ministry for 22 years. That's paid. I mean, obviously, I've been serving the Lord longer than that, but the reality is that these are just things, just bits of wisdom, man, that I've been able to kind of pick up along the way and kick down, and they have been essential to creating multiplication churches.
Yeah. So month 7, plan of attack. This is outreach, forward planning for outreach. Wow, you actually put Xmas in there? Not Christmas?
I did, because it's the cross, baby.
Dude, I'm telling you, man, as a Baptist, that's offensive.
It's putting the cross back in Christmas. I'm just telling you.
Shouldn't it be a T then?
T-mas? T-mas. Yeah, you're right.
Anyway.
Let it forever be known.
Easter. Social stuff, serving the community. Month 8, Jump School. This is the actual launch, getting prepped up for that and doing your launch. Air support, exorcisms, healings, filling of the Spirit, and prayer. That's
Everybody
the month
wants month 9. Everybody's going to want that. Hurry up and get to month 9. Show me how.
That's the month I won't be there because as a good Baptist, we pretty much don't believe that exorcisms happen except in third world countries. And I've told you, man, that's the most uncomfortable thing in the world for me to even... Anyway, we'll go on. Month 10, shoot to kill, preaching, counseling, and pastoral issues. Month 11, advancement, becoming a church planting church. Leadership training, raising people up through COGS. Those are communities of grace or small groups, house churches, missional communities, whatever you want to call it. COGS is just the term that we use. Month 12, digging in, lessons, pitfalls, and getting ready for the second year, which is actually going to be your hardest year in church planting. It's always the hardest year.
Yeah, and going back, Pilgrim mentions, wait, this doesn't include lightsaber training, and indeed it does, and you will be a church planting Jedi by the time you're done, a church planting ninja. That will work for some of you. The reality is, though, one of the things, and we brushed over it really quickly, is we've put together a church planting manual. It has been.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
It has been. Yeah, we went over it really quickly, but one of the things that you get is the church planting manual called Jump School, broken down in topic sections. So every month you're getting this intense, through audio, video, We're equipping you with resources. I mean, it's just killer, man. Then you're getting like, the street level manual on that topic. It's just super, like, seriously, this is what I needed when I planted. That's how we've built this. Is I sat back and thought, what did I need? And then, someone to talk to, someone to help me, someone to interact with, and that the interaction thing is going to be cool. But that's it. But the manual, that is Jump School, and we cannot wait to get that out to you. And yes, you will be a church planting ninja Jedi, and we should give them a lightsaber when they're done.
We should. So here are the fast start bonuses, and the fast start bonuses. Here's what's going to happen if you decide that this is something that you want to do. You want to join this Jump School, be a part of the network. If you sign up, basically, we were going to make it just if you sign up today. We've got some really cool stuff for you. But in thinking about it, since we're going to have this on a replay, and we know that most of our guys are even listening right now. I mean, they're chatting in, going, "I got to go." We're probably going to extend this through the replay for at least the next 3 days is when we're going to have the replay up. So the fast start bonus, if you sign up for this while we're doing the replay, at least through that time period, maybe you want to pray about it, talk about it with your family, things like that. We understand. So these fast start bonuses will extend through the replay. But we've got the Jump School T-shirt. Maybe the fast start bonus should come with the lightsaber there, huh?
Well, maybe we could make T-shirts with lightsabers on them.
There you go. That's the T-shirt. We haven't designed the T-shirt yet, so.
We need to have ones that say, like, Church Planting Ninja in Training, and the other one needs to say Church Planting Jedi in Training.
And it needs to say, Mi dragón es muy rápido. And, again, you have to listen to the podcast to understand that.
That's an insight. If you don't listen to the podcast, you won't understand half our jokes.
If you don't listen to the podcast, I'm not sure you can actually be a church planter.
I think you need to rethink your life and calling.
I think you do. So, audio recordings of classic ministry books that you need to read but probably never will. Again, we know that as a church planter, you're just busy. Life's busy. But, I mean, how I consume a lot of the books, I can't really say that I read because I'm listening to them on audible.com or something like that, because when I'm driving, I just turn my car into, as Zig Ziglar said, a university on wheels. And I never let my drive time be wasted time where I'm just listening to the radio, even if it is. Dun, 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 dun. I got the power. So
that's what Pete always listens to when he's driving down the, like, an 80s,
It's either an audiobook, a podcast, or I got the power.
Oh, that's how it should always open, right?
Always. So when finished, you'll receive a personal review of your readiness to plant. If you pass, you'll become eligible to apply to the Newbury Training Network, and that'll be no cost to you. Other Fast Start bonuses, Peyton's next book, Jump School, Unleashing Gospel Commandos to Take No Man's Land, and then just to be a smart aleck, I put in there Pete's next book, Small Mega Churches, Churches that Choose Gospel Penetration Over Size. We're still up in the air on if Pete's going to actually write that book. More than likely, it'll be based on how many people say I agree with Pete or I don't agree with Pete in their hashtag. But so
we're going to go to Fiverr and have someone write it for us.
Of course. So also during the Fast Start bonuses, instead of it being the $147 a month, we'll do it for the $97 a month. And up on your screen, you should have just had a what they call a pop-ins. It popped up. You see the it's got the old logo, the Established by God logo. How do you like that one?
Well, what do you know?
We'll have to change that. But anyway, you can get registered by going to jumpschooltraining.com or click that add to cart button, and that'll get it started. So it'll officially start August 1st, but the rest of this month, here in July, we're going to be holding special calls just to get you ready for the start that's coming in August. Is there anything else that you want to say on that, Peyton?
Yeah, just that as you go through this, if you're if you see it and you're kind of like, man, that's a lot of money. Just remember 135% higher success rate. If you just got to look at it this way: if you can't afford it, and I'm not a salesman and I'm not trying to sell you, but the reality is, get your sending church to sponsor you. Get somebody to sponsor you. because this is, we care about church planners. Everything else we've ever done is free. I've been training planners. My network was free. And eventually we had to limit it because all these fruit nuts joined up, and I'm like, I don't know these guys, and half of them are weirdos. But the reality is that if you're going to come on, where's I going? I just saw that it's saying that the website, there's an issue. We'll fix that in a second, guys. But anyways, I was just going to say that if you invest in that, however it works out, just make sure that you get your sending church to sponsor or whatever. Our heart is to do everything for you guys that we can, and this is going to help equip other guys too. And that's it, man. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, so I think I forgot to turn on that website, so that's totally my fault. But if you click on the add to cart, that'll take you right to it. While we're doing our break here before we got Dave Ferguson on, I'll make sure jumpschooltraining.com is finished being set up. And so let's actually take that break right now. It is 10:55 here on the West Coast, so let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So at 11:05, we will come back. And we've got the interview with Dave. We actually pre-recorded the interview because we had scheduling issues. So we're going to come back and we'll have that interview here on the Hangout. So if you want, this is the perfect time to go use the restroom. Click the Add to Cart button if you want. Sign up for Jump School, and we'll come back at 11:55 in 10 minutes with that interview. Anything else, Peyton? Final thoughts?
That's it, man. Well, see, guys, don't forget to come back for Dave. Dave is the man. So he's got an incredible presentation. It's one of the best presentations I've ever seen. It's not going to be a repeat of what I've given you. Dave has planted tons of churches. He got started late. He did not do it in his first year. He's going to confess about that, and he's going to tell you maybe if you're behind the game, how to turn it around and not become a statistic. It's going to be a good talk. Pete and I have heard it already, so join us back for that.
Yep, so go ahead and get registered for Jump School and be back here in 10 minutes, and Peyton and I will still be on here answering your questions. So if you still have other questions before we start, go ahead and ask them. But I'm going to mute our mics so that way we don't accidentally, I don't know, say something funny, inappropriate. Anyway. Hey everybody, welcome back from the break, and we've got the fun part of the webinar coming up right now, and of course this is the part that everybody's been waiting for because no one actually wanted to listen to me and Peyton, so, or at least just me, I don't know. So Peyton, you want to introduce our keynote speaker, if you will, our final hurrah, our guest?
Yeah. We have with us a guy who just is an all-around great guy. When I was first getting my book published, Dave was the first guy to say, yeah, I'll look at it and endorse it. And that told me a lot about him. If anybody knows Dave, he is actually one of the big names and ideas behind the Exponential Church Planning Conference. He is the director. Well, you're not the director, you're the founder of the New Thing Network. And Patrick's a director now, isn't he?
You got it.
And he is an author. He's written a book by the same name, Exponential, and also On the Verge. And Dave, it's an honor to have you, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peyton. It's good to be here.
So, Dave, you are the fastest man in the West. You are one of the fastest church planners I know. You have, on the back of a napkin, as I know you'll tell your story, came up with quite an incredible way of multiplying church plants, and we want to have you absolutely knock it out of the park by telling us how we can plant faster than we ever imagined. Because I got to say, when I first read your stuff, I was mind blown. It was the first work I had ever read on multiplication, but I had, on a very small scale, a lot of those principles, I had already begun to see how the Holy Spirit kind of just causes you to let go a little bit of everything. And that's what clearly comes across. So we're going to give you the floor, and we're just going to listen to you, man, while you kind of turn on the pipe and let us have what you got.
All right, I think you wanted me to kind of share a little bit of our story and then maybe a few of our reproducing principles, and feel free to jump in, or at the point in time you start yawning, just cut me off. All right, so enough of it. Or maybe that's Pete's job. Is that your job, Pete? Just like one of these, like
Yeah, I'm the
got it.
one. I'm the one that everyone gets to hate. So
Okay,
sure.
you're the one with the hook. Um, I mean, some of it. I mean, the kind of story you got to go back. I mean, it was myself and my brother, and then a few friends from college. I had just gotten married. John actually, I don't know why I did this as a honeymooner, but he moved in with us, which was probably didn't have any sense. But we all of us kind of had this dream of starting a church. We moved back to Chicago, and one of the first things we did, and I think this, as we kind of look back, I think some of the things that we learned along the way kind of go, some of the stuff you do, you kind of do it almost by accident, and then you look over your shoulder and go, oh my gosh, God really blessed that, and that worked, and then you turn it into a workshop, and then you turn it into a book, and actually just did it by accident the first time. One of the things that we did early on, before we ever had any public worship service or anything like that, is all of us went out and we started these kind of missional groups. And I can remember all five of us that made up this church planning team. We would literally go to everyone else's group just so we had enough people to actually be in a group. And we would actually, you go Monday and then Tuesday, and by Wednesday you're pretending like this is the first time you've met all week, and
Oh, that's awesome.
feigning like, oh, what a brilliant answer, that's such great insight. And it was church planners, you do whatever it takes.
You guys were young too, right, Dave? I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
you were really young.
yes, I was 25. John was 23. My buddy Darren was 21. We were all 21. We were all in our early 20s. No money, no buildings, no sense. I'd say the one thing though, the one thing that was true about us is our hearts really beat fast. This is the way we talk about it, to help people find their way back to God. I mean, we were totally, and I think still, sold out. That was the thing that just, that's the thing that gets you up in the morning and keeps you up late at night, is, seeing people far from God and lives transformed. And I still love that. But anyway, first thing we started these small groups. I remember my first apprentice leader was a guy named Jerry, who wasn't even a believer, but his spiritual trajectory was at least taking him towards Jesus. He was interested, and we just started meeting regularly, doing one-on-ones, and it wasn't long before Jerry actually did become a Christ follower. I got a chance to baptize him and stuff. And the one thing we did then back then is we made sure every one of our groups had an apprentice leader. One of the things I've learned now, we're at a place, and I'll fast forward and then come back again. We're at a place now where, we have a multi-site church, we have this whole church planning network, but almost everything, Peyton, that when we talk about how to reproduce macro now, like with our network, like you're doing with New Breed and stuff, we go back to the principles that we learned micro, and apply them that way. And to date, and maybe we'll learn some things in the future that won't work, but to date, almost all of it's transferable and makes sense. Spans of care, reproducing, apprenticeship, all that kind of stuff. And so what we learned really in that very first set of small groups are things we still apply today that are movement-making kind of principles. And so we've just continued to reproduce these missional groups. One of the things I've also learned along the way, that as we do coaching with the churches that want to go to multi-site or churches that want to start networks, those churches that have an infrastructure of reproducing either groups or missional communities, whatever that smallest mechanism is, whatever it is, when they have that at the core, they're a lot more likely to be successful reproducing large. We see that over and over and over again. And so we began to reproduce these groups, and it was probably about 5 or 6 years into it. One of the guys that God kind of brought into my life was in my small group was a guy named Bruno and his buddy Nick. Those two guys were actually real estate developers. Bruno was having a brutal time in his marriage. He actually had gone to a secular counselor to try to figure this out. The secular counselor said, well, maybe you can get some kind of spirituality in your life. That'll help. So his buddy Nick was kind of coming to our church sometimes. They're partners in real estate. And they both started coming to my small group just looking for some answers. And I'll never forget the night in that group where we were actually going through the Gospel of John. It was Bruno's wife, Judy. She's looking at the Bible, and we're getting the part about Nicodemus, and she says, born again. Looks up, born again. I think that's what's happening to me.
Wow.
And she was right. And I got to see them both become Christ followers. I got to see Nick and his wife become Christ followers. Got to baptize them. And one of the things we've learned kind of along the way about small groups like that too is we treat them like they're Christians until they realize they're not.
Yeah.
It's the thing that we've all of us are learning. Belonging before you believe. So treat them like they're Christians before they realize they're not. Well, one of the things that happened with Nick and Bruno, because they didn't have any real church background, is they began to look at this small group that we had, and they said, hey, this experience of community that we have in this group, how can we get that in the properties we're starting across the Midwest? And they had about 26 properties. And I said, I don't know, but let's figure it out. Well, long story short, they tried to find a piece of property, because we were still meeting in high school, where we could, maybe have our first facility, that kind of thing. That didn't work. They were developing a property in the next town, 2 towns away, about half hour away. And they said, well, what if we just move the whole church down there? And I was like, well, I don't know, maybe that'll work. And then I thought, well, they got 26 properties, and I'm a church planner. What if we just started another location down there? And we kind of took, again, some of the principles we learned from small groups, and we took one leader who was ready, sent him out there, anybody wanted to go with him, and basically we launched another site, and we ended up being one of the, this has been almost 15 years ago now, one of the first churches to actually go multiple locations, because and this was God's just total blessing, none of our smarts, because they were real estate developers, they had some coin, and they actually built a facility, about a $3 million facility, with focus groups from our church. And imagine that. I mean, you're a church planner meeting in a high school, and God dumps that in your lap. How cool is that?
All I want to know is, do they have a sister?
No. But next time they want to build a community center, I'll send them your way.
Thank you, my brother.
Yes. And so this vision began to go from, we're reproducing groups, and of course we're reproducing service, small celebration service. Now we're reproducing sites. And then the next thing that kind of happened is a few years later, a guy named Dave Rashay. Dave was my youth pastor at the time. Loved Dave, loved working with Dave. He came to me and said, you know what? I think I want to go plant a church. Now, as embarrassing as this is, I mean, we were 8 years in the life of the church. We'd never planted a church, which is, I mean, Pete, what do you think about that?
I think that's not really multiplication.
No, that sucks. That sucks. If you're really in charge of this show right now, Pete, you'd cut me off. But like, what do we got this guy on here for? That's what you'd be doing. Yeah, I know. Now it's like unfathomably. I mean, I look back and I'm like, what the heck was I doing? Because I mean, we got our churches now. I mean, they're starting new churches in the first, year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we sucked. But so anyway, we're kind of
let me ask you something, Dave. Was it a mindset change that you guys had? I mean, was it always your intent that you would start multiple churches, or was that just something that changed in your mind as you went?
Well, this makes it even worse. No, that was our intention.
Well, all right.
I know. You're trying to bail me out. Like I had some epiphany. No, because like when we started, when we were all in our early 20s, I can remember we all sat in this little restaurant and we laid out our threefold vision for the church. And we said, okay, phase 1, we want to be an impact church. We're going to impact our neighborhood, right? We want to be the kind of church, if you pulled it out of there, the neighborhood go like, no, we got to have this church here, right? Then we said in phase 2, this is before we had anything. We said phase 2, we want to be a reproducing church. And then we said phase 3, if God would bless it, we want to be a movement. Now, I don't know how the heck we thought we were going to get there.
Yeah.
Sitting on our butts. But anyway, so yeah, no, we intended to do it, but we didn't. So.
But I love that though, Dave, because
I hate it.
Now, if you would come on and you're like, man, we're the biz, man, we're the hotness, the Holy Spirit's like, I can't do much with that, You're in a place, man, where just like, we had no clue what we were doing, and at some point, man, stuff started popping and happening, and I love that, man, because I think those are the kind of stories that the average guy sitting around is going, yeah, I get that. Most of us have been in ministry for some time, right?
I guess. I don't know. I like it when I don't suck. Okay.
I hear you, man. But you know what? I planted my first church on accident. I would not be a church planner if I hadn't planted accidentally.
Really?
Yeah. I wasn't cool enough to plant a church.
How old were you?
Gosh. 32 maybe? I think I'm making that up. 31, 32.
Oh, see, then you were like a KG veteran.
Oh yeah.
Imagine
Absolutely.
people showing up. I was 25. My brother John's 23. The other guy's 21. Now I think about it, I'm just like stunned. I can't believe anybody showed up and stuck around.
Yeah.
It was like a youth group. Anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, we started going we started reproducing sites. So anyway, back to Dave Roche. So this guy comes to me. I want to go plant a church. And truthfully, I wasn't really keen on the idea because I liked him being on my staff, and I really wanted him to be like a youth pastor for my kids.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, I really feel like God's saying we're supposed to go plant this church." I said, "Well, where?" He said, "Denver." You know. And I was like, "All right." And partly to kind of, I think, appease him, I said, "Well, why don't you check it out?" And he goes out there, and he's gone for not even a week. And when he comes back, we sit down. I said, "How'd it go?" And he says, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "Believe what?" And he said, "Well, I made some awesome connections when I was gone with some people in churches, and I've already raised over $100,000."
Wow.
And I was just kind of like,
Wow.
"Holy crap! You're kidding me? That's unbelievable." And so it was just clear that God was kind of blessing this thing. God was behind this thing, and so we made a decision. This time a good one. We said, okay, you know what? If God's behind this, if God's blessing this, then we need to too. So we got Dave and his wife Heather up in front of all the people at Community, and we said, listen, if God's blessing this, if God's behind this, then we need to get behind it. And if God's sending them out to Denver, then some of you need to go with them.
Yeah.
And this was amazing. We had about 35 folks that said, all right, they sold their homes, moved to Denver, transferred schools, got new jobs, and went and helped them start that brand new church. And so then we kind of, because we're a pretty relational culture, we just stayed in relationships, started doing things together. And then we started planting, we kind of got some mojo about this whole thing. And so then we started planting some other churches, like in Detroit and in New York and Boston. And started forming, we'd get together and just talk about it and stuff. And that's when we started calling it New Thing. And,
so please.
I mean, it's really, it's been kind of, I don't know if you're like this or not, Peyton or Pete, but I mean, like when you're a kid, you had certain dreams. Like I always wanted to be a professional basketball player.
I agree.
All right. just because I'm 5, 10 and a half, and
nothing wrong with that, baby.
Right. And because you're like, wow, that's like people will pay you and to play basketball, but I kind of feel like that now. It's kind of like I'm getting to play in the NBA of like church planting. It's like I'm getting to do all these, hang out with cool people like you and do all this cool stuff. It's just awesome. But anyway, so the whole thing now, I mean, we're a church of several thousand people. We got 13 locations. We got plans for probably 9 more sites in the next 6 years here in Chicago. We have dreams, and we talk about how can we get to 200 locations in Chicago. New Thing has more than 150, getting close to 200 sites now, reproducing at just an incredible rate. I just feel really grateful to be a part of the whole thing.
Dave, did I hear somewhere that you guys were planning close to 1 church a week with New Thing?
That's probably my brother saying that.
Okay.
Is it true?
No, it's probably it's pastor math.
Oh, okay.
There was probably a window that we were, but we were probably been somewhere around 1 every 11 days, something like that. Something that looks good on a brochure. But it's
but hey, pastor math, it's close to Easter. There was plenty of that going on a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. But no, I mean that part. I mean, if you graphed it out over the last whatever it's been, New Thing's been around 7-8 years. It has. I mean, it's. We feel very, very fortunate, and God is doing some cool stuff. And so
that's awesome, man.
One of the things
I love your heart. I love the heart that New Thing has. I mean, I've kind of tracked with you guys for about 3 years, just kind of checking in. Like I said, I read Exponential. I didn't even know what the conference was when I read that book.
Yeah.
It had a great title, and I'm like, okay, church planning books. Boom, I picked one up, and I read that, and my favorite part of your story is you and the businessman. You and was it your brother and a couple friends are like, look, we're gonna carve Chicago up into 4 sections, 4 quarters, and I love this, the naivete of youth, and yet here's the dream this many years later. And it's not far off, right? You guys go, look, we're gonna. You had no clue what you're talking about. You had no clue what you're up against.
That part's absolutely correct.
That's the beautiful part about it, right? Because if you had thought too much about it and you knew all the factors, you probably would have said, oh, well, we can't do that. And that's the beauty of it. You're like, we're going to chop this city up into 4 quadrants, and we're going to reach it. And I think, tell me the story, because I'm probably butchering it right now. You're sitting in a diner across the table from a businessman, and he challenges you.
Yeah, I mean the thing there was early on when we were all in college together. We actually took a map of Chicago, put it up on our dorm wall. I took a big old thick black magic mark, said 8 million people. How hard can this be? I made a line north and south and a line east and west, and I put our initials in each of the quadrants. Said, okay, you got that 2 million, you got that 2 million, I got that 2 million, and John, you got that 2 million. We're done. And so that was kind of the basic dream. And then later on, I was at actually a Mexican restaurant here right in the same town I'm in right now. And that's when, instead of those 4 quadrants, I just started drawing circles all over the city of Chicago. And it was like I felt like God kind of gave me that and going like, maybe there is a way where, instead of 2 million in a chunk, what if he was there? Got 200 neighborhoods in Chicago and about 200 suburbs. I mean, what if there was a way where you begin to think about strategic? How do you get a reproducing church in every neighborhood, in every suburb, and start drawing circles and circles and circles? Well, I took that napkin, tucked it into my journal, and that was, I think it stayed there for more than 3 years. And whenever I'm talking to church planners, so I always just challenge, say, hey, what's the dream God's put in you? What's the dream?
Yeah, amen.
Because I think a lot of us, we do have big dreams inside us, but they get tucked away like that.
Yeah.
And like you were referring to, thank goodness for a guy named Larry. So again, Larry was not a guy who was a believer. It was a guy who I was hoping to see him find his way back to God. He was coming to community some, and we had this kind of affinity. He was an entrepreneur, and I like starting new things. And we were having breakfast, and he was the guy who asked me, said, hey, what's the dream? If you could do anything, what would you do? And actually, he had to ask me 2 or 3 times, where I finally had the courage to kind of reach in my journal, pull out that napkin, and go, you know what, Larry, if I could do anything, and I showed him the napkin with all the circles all over Chicago, I'd do this. And it's the craziest thing, but he just looks across the table and he goes like, oh, Dave, you can do that. You can totally do that.
I love it.
I know. And it was like, it was the weirdest thing. It was just like he reached inside. There was like an on-off switch. He just like, all of a sudden, something that was impossible suddenly just like flipped the switch on and it became possible. And, but you guys have had this experience too. I mean, I think as you've been around a little more and maybe have a little bit of success, you get a chance to speak in other people's lives. I love it when I get to sit across from church planners and hear their dream, and then to be the guy to go like, dude, or maybe it's a woman too, like, I'm telling you, you can totally do this. Yeah. You can do it. And you can just see their eyes light up and go like, really? Really? You seriously think, oh man, I'm telling you, you can do it. And
it's like Shark Tank, isn't it? It's like Shark Tank. When you see the sharks get excited, those are the big wigs. So, it would be an opposite experience. You're like, no, it's not going to work. Dave Ferguson told me my dream wouldn't work.
That's what I'm going to do sometime. I'm going to pull that one. Everybody else, yes, but you, not so much.
Yeah, totally. You got to have a plant. You got to have a plant just to scare him. In the old cop movies, they'd have a guy and they'd rough him up and throw him down the hallway, and he was another cop. You got to do that. You got to have a plant that you can just abuse.
But that was definitely, without a doubt, a pivotal point in my journey. And I've come to a point where I think, as a leader, you've been able to see that in the people that are following you, whether you're leading a church planting network or whether you're leading a church or a small group, you believing that God has something inside you that He meant for you to do that contributes to the mission, and you also believing that for other people. That is the mechanism for movement.
Yeah.
And I think it's also consistent with the Reformation. It's just the priesthood of all believers, that all of us are supposed to play a part in this whole thing. And it was huge. That was huge for me. That was definitely a moment, and I've seen that happen with others. I remember sitting across the table from a guy named Dave Dummett. Do you know Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, Dave,
actually, no. I don't know him. Sorry.
He's the guy he's a New Thing Church. He's up in the Detroit area. He's probably 7 years into it. It's a huge church now. I don't know 3,000 or 4,000 people. A couple sites planting churches. But I remember he came to our cafe. He'd been leading the college ministry. He was trying to figure out what to do next, and he was one of those guys where you could. I mean, it's one of those kind of like a no-brainer, going like, oh my gosh, this guy's totally got it. But he just needed someone to tell him. And I remember just going like, oh man, you can totally. In fact, you don't know how good you're going to be yet, and he's killing it. And it's fun to see those kind of things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, we have one of those. We We were just doing a podcast earlier today, and we were talking about how it's like he's taken everything from multiplication and he's just spewing it out as if it's original. It's the first time it's ever been said, and he gets it, but it's hardwired into him. It's
That's
just
awesome.
who he is. It's who God's made him. It's that apostolic calling.
That's cool.
So that's awesome, man. So, so what? I'm sorry. We should probably let you talk a few more minutes. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm so excited to ask you some questions.
You want to go into question, or if you want, I can give them one reproducing tool here. You want to do that?
Yeah. Oh, that's where I was
We get to
going,
hear
man.
Peyton enough.
Pete's
You don't
getting
want to
bored.
hear me, man.
See that? Pete's getting bored. I can feel it. I almost got the hook.
No. Peyton gets the hook.
You almost said enough. I can feel it. All right, here we go.
Pete, will you stop abusing our guest?
Yeah. All right, so for your church planners, one of the things I think that Peyton's kind of alluded to, maybe you picked it up on Exponential, I think one of the things that's fundamentally true about movements is that in order for them to be movements, the systems, everything about it needs to be simple and reproducible. Simple and reproducible. If it's simple and reproducible, then it can go viral, then it can multiply quickly, that kind of stuff. And so one of the values that we've kind of had is how do you make things simple enough? And this doesn't mean watered down at all. It doesn't mean you're not challenging people, but how do you make it simple enough you can write it on the back of a napkin? And so here you go. Here is.
I love it.
I'll just kind of walk people through this one here. So one of the things we have, and it's actually in our book Exponential too. This is just our leadership path, and some of your people may be seeing this, but I can give you a couple stories to kind of back it up. And this has been, I think, crucial for us at community, but also at New Thing, and how we've kind of given, particularly apostolic leaders, kind of a vision for their future. So, for example, I'll start with one at community first. Guy named John. He started coming to community. He was just by God's grace, he was kind of a big dog leader. You could just see it all over him. And started coming, and basically he found me and said, "Hey, I would love to figure out how can I have a bigger influence in the life of community." I remember, so we went out to Panera, had lunch together, and basically over the course of about a half an hour, I was able to sketch out for him, saying, "Hey, here's a leadership path. Here's how you can continue to expand your influence, maybe probably over the next decade or more, if you decide to." And it really just gave him this vision. So I just said, John, right now, you're an individual. And I think you're not really plugged into the church yet, but if you'll take the next step, I'd love to see, and the next step was to become an apprentice. I lead a small group that's on mission. If you want to join my group, I would love to have you be my apprentice. And by being my apprentice, I would begin to invest in you. We'd meet every week. And then over time, you'd move from being an apprentice to being a leader. Well, when would I know I'm a leader? When does that happen? It's basic, John. Here's the way it works. When you think you're ready, and I think you're ready, you're ready. And we'll move you into a leadership role. And basically what you'll do is either you'll take over my group that I have now, or you can go start a brand new group. Either way, whichever one you want. I said, and then actually, John, one of the things that I see in you, and we talk about that at community too, we say the four most important letters in the alphabet are I, C, in you. I, see in you. And I said, one of the things I see in you, John, is, you have the ability to move way beyond that, because if you'll then take another person alongside you and do what I did with you, apprentice them, you can move into a role of being a coach. And if you begin to coach those people, you'll help them reproduce. And, John, if you're serious about continuing to expand your impact, you could move from being a coach to actually a director where you come on staff. And I could see you leading a whole ministry for us. Now, John's occupation, he was a motivational speaker, had his own business, spoke all over the country for our large groups. So he's a gifted communicator in addition to being a good leader. And so it was easy for me to say, you know what, with the kind of gifts God gave you, I could see you being a campus pastor or a church planner.
Right.
And John is probably the most relational guy, one of the most relationally savvy guys I know. He's really sharp. And I said, if you wanted to plant a church in time, I would love to see you do that, get behind you, helping you do that. You can help other people do the same thing, and you can become a network leader. And in about a half an hour, I was able to lay out on the back of a napkin, individual, apprentice, leader, coach, director, church planner or campus pastor or network leader, and kind of lay out the whole thing right in front of him. And And over the last, I don't know, 15 years or so at Community, we've seen, score. It's not just an example like you use in a book, but scores of people. Troy McMahon, Troy's a buddy of mine. Troy, I remember when he was my apprentice leader, where he was working at General Mills. I've seen him now go all through this path over the last 15 years. Now he's actually leading a movement of about 15 churches in Kansas City that has multiple networks. Wow. He planted a church, got about 1,000 people in 3 locations. He's just killing it. And I'm just so proud of that guy moving through this whole path.
Yeah. How long, Dave, does it take for the average person to go from individual all the way up to where your buddy is?
I think part of it depends on what your leadership capacity is. I don't think everybody has the capacity like Troy, so that's why it makes a great story to be a network leader. Some people only have the capacity maybe to be a coach or be a missional leader, group leader. But I think for Troy, I think for him, and he was kind of on the fast track. I think it was about 8 or 9 years from the time he was my apprentice in my small group. The time he actually became a campus pastor, right, and then eventually a church planter, and then a network leader. But the network leader part, that was probably 11, 12 years into it. Awesome. But what's kind of cool about this though too, even as a tool, is I can remember even conversations like with a young leader at Exponential, who they know they want to plant a reproducing church. They know they want to do something that kind of big for the kingdom. As you articulate this, you can see their eyes kind of light up, because this kind of it kind of puts on paper, going like, yeah, that's it, that's the thing, that's what I want to do, that's it. How did you know? And they haven't been able to, maybe they haven't had the experience to like actually map out the steps to get there. But it's like, wow, someone showed them a map of how to do this big thing that they've been wanting to do for the kingdom. And that's one of half dozen or more kind of simple reproducing tools that we use that has been terrific.
It's hot, absolutely hot. And what I love about it is that, like you said, it's simple and it's reproducible. I love the fact you put it on a napkin. Did you do that for us?
I did that for you. I was at Starbucks.
That's awesome.
You know Ray Chang?
Yeah.
Actually, Ray was in Chicago today. He's teaching up at Trinity. We're talking about how this new regenerate deal can partner with New Thing and how we start doing some church planning together. And so after I got done, I said, okay, I'm talking to Peyton tonight, so I better get my Starbucks napkin out there. And
I actually thought that was a marketing piece that you had printed on napkins. I didn't realize you actually put that on Starbucks.
I've been hanging out with Pete too long because I've been thinking, wow, that's awesome. They actually have it on napkins. And I thought, no, that actually looks handwritten.
We actually have it on napkins because I wrote it this afternoon on a napkin.
You're awesome, dude. I love that. As Rod Tidwell said, that's what I totally dig about you, man. So here's the deal, is that it's simple and it's reproducible. I mean, that is, like, as I look at what I do, right, the biggest barrier to reproduction from where I'm standing and my limited knowledge of this is people. If I'm not training people to train people, then it's not going to happen. And that's what, I mean, I could take that napkin and boom, and sow that vision into every single person that gets saved. I mean, every single person that gets saved. That's what's beautiful about that.
Yeah. And I mean, we could talk about, if you want to, we can talk about the 5 steps that we use, which you can put on the back of a napkin. We could talk about the 6 coaching questions you can put on the back of a napkin. We can talk about our blessed practices, BLESS, that are missional practices put on the back of a napkin. We can talk about our self-leadership practices that are the RPMs, relational, physical, spiritual, mental, or, that I use every day, put on the back of a napkin, all that kind of stuff.
I love it. So when you're meeting with guys, do you literally do you take a napkin out and you just write it on the back?
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. I love that. That's so cool.
That's not really that cool.
This Martin Final, he's got like a big package, industrial restaurant size of napkin. I'm going to need some of these today, honey. I'm leaving.
He's got the fanny pack. He's got him in a fanny pack on his waist.
I love it, man. No, but that's so cool, though. I love it. And then you just hand him the napkin.
Oh, yeah. Actually, and I
know I'm getting hung up on the napkin, but you got to understand.
You know what, though? It's kind of obnoxious because, everything when I was out with my son the other day, he's in college and he's trying to figure out what he wants to do next. So here's a napkin. I just hung on to it. Here's his whole future.
For Christmas and your birthday, people were getting you Dad, here's a notebook, Dad. Here's a notebook.
Yeah, they make fun of me now, so that's okay.
No, I dig it, man. Because that's just cool. That's what I'm into Batman, so that's like your battering, dude. That's like your thing.
There it is.
I dig it.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, what you're talking about there, your 6 leadership steps, the 5 principles, all that. I'm interested in all that. I know we have limited time with you, but whatever you want to share about that, I think people need to hear this because it's cool, man.
You want me to give you another one?
Yeah.
All right, here's one more.
Cool, huh, Pete, are you giving him the hook yet? This is cool, huh?
No way. I'm not giving him the hook. I give you the hook.
I was gonna say this is rock and roll, Dave.
It's hypnotized. All right, here you go. Here's another one. This is I'll call this. This is just kind of self-leadership stuff. I think fundamentally, if you're going to be a reproducing church, right, reproducing movements, all that kind of stuff, I think at the core you end up reproducing who you are.
Right.
And so I mean, so some of it has to start with you. And so one of the things that I've really tried to be more disciplined about, especially in the last few years, is okay, who am I? Because I know that's going to rub off on other folks, and that's when we're going to reproduce. So one of the things you look at Luke 2:52, where it talks about maybe this might be a little bit of an exegetical stretch, but a little bit of a stretch. But if there was any indication of Jesus' own kind of leadership development, maybe that's it. That he grew in wisdom, stature, and favor with God and man. And basically, we kind of took those and said, okay, that's if you want to break those down, you can call those the RPMs: relational, physical, spiritual, and mental. So let's see where we go. There you go. That's kind of how I put it on the back of my napkin when I'm explaining it. But one of the things that I've done is, like, for me, this just works for me. Oh, there you go. Here you go. Here's my other napkin, my journal. There's the Chicago napkin you wanted to see.
That's awesome.
It's not the real one. I made that up. It's fake.
It's in the community church gift shop, right? When you come out.
Community does not have a gift shop. They don't have a bookstore either.
Coffee bar?
Okay, here we go. This is going to look bad, but I'm going to do it anyway because you guys seem to give me brownie points for sucking. So here's where I suck some.
Oh, this is great. This is cool, man.
So one of the things I do every day, and this will give you a little bit of insight into what's both good and bad about me. So at the top of my journal, I like actually do this every day. RPMS. And so I write it out, and what's great about it is then I actually ask myself, okay, how am I doing in each of these areas of my life? How am I doing relationally? And so how am I doing in relationally means, like, how am I doing with my kids? And one of the values I've had for a long time is each of my kids, as they're growing up and still do this, I take them out for breakfast one day a week. And I can tell you stories about that, but that's just been.
That's hot.
It's one of those things, again, I accidentally did right when my daughter first started going to all day first grade, and I did it all the way through, and it's awesome. I coach my kids' teams, and this is the first year none of them played baseball, and I drove by a baseball field yesterday. I almost just stopped just to watch the game because I love that. I love coaching the kids' teams and stuff, but anything with the family, especially, how am I doing relationally? And I actually give myself a score here between 1 and 10. And I scored.
I notice you have 10 on all of them right now.
No. Actually, I got an 8.75. I'm killing it relationally. Look, I'm killing it.
Right on.
And then I'll put a stock index. I'll give myself even an arrow that goes up or down to tell me how I'm trending.
I love it, man. This is great.
Yeah. Well, here's what's really bad in a second. But so then the physical part. So then the P is for physical, because I think you got to be, a good steward of your body too.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you think about some of the leaders that you really, I look up to too. A lot of them are they're taking great care of their body because you can't stay up at this time at night and do these kind of webinars with you if you're not in great shape.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But anyway, I think that's a really important one.
It is.
It was pretty funny. Was it last year at Exponential? I think it was last year at Exponential East. I think Wayne Cordero was there, and Wayne, he's a little older than us, but he's in great shape, just great shape. And and he was filling out his shirt, And I remember I came after I did an interview or something with him, or I'd introduced him or something. I came back down and sat next to my wife, and Sue's elbowing me and goes like, my wife, Sue, what's up with Wayne? And then she says, maybe you ought to start lifting. You know, like,
Nice.
but I
Hear a thing Wayne said.
I remember I went out to Hawaii. This has been several years ago now, and did one of those kind of follow Wayne around. And the dude does. I mean, that's part of his routine is exercising. And
I agree with you 100%.
And so anyway, that's another one. Then the third one is mental, and that's about like I always want to know. Okay, am I staying on top of current events? Am I reading books? Am I stretching myself mentally? Leaders or learners, that kind of thing. And I give myself a score again there. And then the last one is spiritually. How am I doing spiritually? How am I doing with my disciplines like journaling and connecting with God, that kind of stuff? And so I do that. One of the things that I think is good about this, the RPMs, is by doing these every day like that as a part of your journaling or part of your quiet time or your devotion, whatever you call it. I feel like, and I don't know, maybe only time will tell for sure, but I kind of feel like I'm not going to suddenly find myself in a ditch. Because it's kind of like every day I'm asking myself these questions, and so I have to be lying to myself in a big, bold way because I know how I'm trending in all these things. And if you look at mine right now, like physically, it's by far the lowest one. And part of it is, I ran a half marathon last November, but my running, which is primarily what I do to kind of stay on top of things, it's been lame. I mean, totally lame. And I know it's just partly because of the schedule I've been keeping. Yeah. And so and it says right now I got a 2. I got a 2 on this. I said my relational's 8.75, my physical's a 2.0. So it's going like, dude, flashing red light, you better do something. Yeah. And but anyway, this has been really helpful to me. That kind of a self-leadership tool. And
that's awesome.
Of course, you can put it on the back of my napkin.
Yeah. I'm just happy you actually have paper. I was actually wondering if you had paper where you were at.
Well, we save a lot of money by borrowing napkins from restaurants.
From going to all the Italian places in Chicago. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
So, the Bears and doubles?
Oh, man. Love the Bears.
I had to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Love the Bears. I'm liking the defensive picks that we got in the draft here. There's I think that's going to help us a lot. The Bulls. Love the Bulls. I was very disappointed with what happened with the Wizards in the playoffs. Totally bummed me out. I think the problem with the Bulls is I think they play playoff intensity basketball during the regular season. And so when they get the regular season, everybody else takes up a notch. They got nowhere to go. Now, let's talk about the Cubs and the White Sox.
I take this. Get Dave talking about baseball.
I hate the Cubs. Well, my brother's a huge Cub fan, but I hate the Cubs. The White Sox, we're almost 500 this year. Jose Abreu's out. Chris Sale's pitching tonight against the Yankees. I'm missing it because I'm with you guys.
No,
that'll be good.
Well, man. Back to the subject at hand. I know the sports is a lot more interesting.
There he goes. There's the hook, Dave.
There is the hook. No, but it's the hook because I'm curious about something that you talked about. Specifically, what I'd like to know is what does it look like for you when you take your kids to breakfast every week? And the reason why I ask that, I mean, our listeners know that, like, I just had a son 2.5 years ago. He's almost 3. So awesome. I'm not. I didn't think I was going to have any kids. I mean, truth be told, I was hoping I wasn't going to have any kids, but my wife had other plans, and so here I am, right?
Oh, hello.
And that, I mean, it concerns me the most in raising a kid because I love my family, but I'm not close with my family at all. In fact, I rarely. We talk on birthdays and holidays. Like, that's the kind of relationship that I've got.
He means his mom and his dad, not his wife and son.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify.
Okay. Yes. Thanks for that. I barely consider myself as in a family, right? Because it's like, it was me and my wife for, 12 years by ourselves. So anyway, so tell me, what does that look like? I mean, and how are you balancing work and family? And how have you balanced work and family over all the years?
Yeah. Well, I think the way it looks is, like, I would say, if my advice to you is, like, so when your kid goes to kindergarten or starts in first grade, just Ask them, what's their favorite place? Probably Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, my little dudes, they love Dunkin' Donuts. And so we did Dunkin' Donuts for a lot of time. And basically you go and you order a cup of coffee and a donut, and they get a chocolate milk and a donut, and you sit there and you talk about sports, you talk about school, you talk about whatever, and you kind of develop this routine. And here's the thing too, and I'll be honest with you, I don't remember with any of them, and I still got one at home. I was a sophomore in high school. I don't remember with any of them ever having this like life-changing, eternity-altering, conversation where like, oh man, that was so awesome. I don't remember any of them like that. But I think what happens is I think over the course of all those years, I mean, you end up talking about all kinds of stuff, all kinds of everything virtually. Mm-hmm. But you build a relationship. And I think that's how relationships get built, just kind of one conversation at a time. And so I think what it does, there's always the open door so that when we are going through a tough time. Right. So it was like even today, it was kind of cool. So my daughter is the oldest one. She's 23, just graduated got her master's. She's a social worker. After I got to meet with Ray Chang over at Starbucks and writing on the napkins, she called me, and then she just stopped by. And so here we are again. She's 20. We're hanging out at Starbucks, which is where we hung out when she was in high school. Yeah. So I would say don't put pressure on yourself to like make anything significant happen. It's just like you're two dudes hanging out, having a good time, And that's one of the things I love about coaching too, because it became just one of those places where I got to be a part of their life, and I loved it. But I would say this too. I think one of the great things about church planning, I think, is when you come in, you get to establish the culture, and you also get to establish the rhythms and routines that happen in the life of that church. And so if you, like for us at Community, and for me, I don't think this is going to be a stretch. I don't think I've ever had any meetings that would consistently meet on weeknights. So I'm in a group, and we connect on Wednesday nights, but I don't have any meetings during that night. So I'm always home for dinner, and then after. And part of that's just how we start. Now I'd cheat on the front end. I won't lie to you. And I get up at 5 a.m, that kind of stuff. So I'll crank it on that end, but not on the evening. And so I would, as a church planner, establish the culture, establish the rhythms, but then make it work so you can coach your kids' teams. Make it work so you can take your kid to breakfast and make everybody else work around it. I had somebody this last week, I don't know, they were mad about something, and they sent me an email and said, hey, there was like 4 of them. We'd all cleared our schedule, and so we can meet with you at 3:30 on Friday. And I was nice about it, but I said, I can't meet with you at 3:30 on Friday. Well, we've all cleared our schedule, came the email back. Well, I can't. And you know why? I couldn't, because my other son, he runs track in college, he had a meet actually in our hometown here, and he was going to be home, and it was the first time he'd been home in a couple of months. No, I'm not. Yeah. No, that doesn't work.
Nah, that's right.
I don't care how important or how mad you are. So anyway, and if you also even think kingdom-wise, probably the best discipling, the best apprenticing you'll ever do is going to be with your kids. Amen. I mean, you get that right. Oh man. I mean, Sue and I talk about this way, and I'll shut up because I feel like I'm rambling now. My wife and I talk about it this way. It's not completely true, but it's true enough that we say it this way. If you blow it at home, you've blown it.
Absolutely.
And I think God can redeem it. If you go through a divorce, any kind of script, He can redeem it. But I don't want Him to have to in that place. So, like, I really want to make sure I try to give it my very best shot and get it right at home. And
that's well said, man. Really well said. Yeah, no, that's the stuff, man. What you're talking about right there, and I think what you're saying is, much like what Paul says, if you lead your family well, I mean, that is where it's at. That's where it starts, man. And people pay lip service to it, but you've actually got things in place to make sure that happens.
It's been kind of cool too. I mean, I'll use social media too, where I'll intentionally, I'll take a picture of Caleb eating his Long John at Dunkin' Donuts, on a Thursday morning or Friday morning. Hey, I'm out of Dunkin' Donuts with Caleb, and you kind of put it out there.
Yeah.
And part of that is it also now have other dads come and say, hey, you know what, I've started doing this breakfast thing, and that's not, and it may be something else that works for you. It may not be the breakfast thing, but
dude, I'm going to donuts tomorrow. I'm just telling you, we're out to donuts tomorrow. It's happening. I'm not even joking. Like, I'm really taking my daughter to donuts tomorrow. That's awesome. We did start. I do have to be honest. What we have started doing is ninja fighting. I went to
fighting. How does this work?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have like Nerf foam katanas and like bow staffs, and so we just beat on each other with them. She's 5. I win.
She's 5. I win.
We actually have to have a rule in the house right now where she has to say ninja engage. And Mommy made that rule up because she was doing like flying karate kicks like out of the blue, and we got a baby, so I'm holding the baby, and oh man, I'm telling you, but it is really bonding. But I think I'm going to do the donut thing too.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's cool. You'll love it.
Oh man, that's great. That is really, really sage advice, man. I appreciate that. So just going back to the whole reproducing thing, because I think even what you're saying right there, you've built really a discipleship culture even within your home. Like that's the takeaway I'm getting. If I'm just stringing everything together, it started in your home. Maybe in a future date, maybe we'll get you on the podcast. I'd love to hear how you and your wife do ministry together. Maybe get her on as well.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And just see, because you guys are veterans, man. You've done the tag team thing.
You hear that, Pete? You know what that was? He just called me old, didn't he? That's what it was.
Well, it was a nice way to put it.
I liked how earlier when you said, because Wayne's older than us, and I just, I noticed you included me within that whole, age bracket.
Yeah, I thought we were going to.
I am greater than you. Actually,
I see how this works.
What cracks me up though, Dave, is like, I know that you're older than me, but you look younger than me. What's your secret? Oil of Olay, what are you doing, girlfriend? Because I'm telling you, your skin is beautiful.
Dunkin' Donuts. That's the secret.
There's enough oils in one Dunkin' Donut to hydrate me for a week.
That's right. Lots of chocolate donuts.
But going back to reproducing culture, and I know we got to let you go in a few minutes here. How do you, because what I'm getting from you is that your napkin, you can take that with any guy and you give him that napkin, you're kind of shaping the DNA, you're shaping, like you said, you're setting the tone and the rhythm, you get to create the culture. When you first have a guy who's say like a church planner, how is he going to seed the DNA into what he's doing, into all the people that have come along? Obviously, as you know, from with the church planning launch team or core team, you know that people are coming with a lot of church baggage. How does he take that and start seeding that DNA into this church plant that he's doing so that each one of them realizes that, hey, I can boom, 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 boom. I mean, like you said, not everyone has the potential. I get that.
Yeah.
But you're creating that vision within them. How does a church planner from day one start seeding multiplication?
I think two things come to mind is, and one is maybe a little philosophical, and then the second will be a story. I think it's really important that your actions always reinforce your language, or your behaviors always match your words. So that you've got to be, especially early on, if you're saying, you know what, we're going to be about reproducing. I mean, you've got to make sure that your behaviors, your disciplines, the things you're doing are actually living that out. Because churches are notorious for kind of saying, here's who we are, but you really don't have to do it. And so when your actions or when your behaviors don't match your words, then the culture lacks any integrity, and people know they don't have to really live out those values. Yeah. And I think it's really, and most church planners probably who put some thought into a church plant, they probably established certain values. They just got to figure out, okay, now how do we make sure in almost every day, or at least every week, our behaviors reinforce those values, and those are consistent. I think that's just critical. One story comes to mind. There's a guy named Doug. Doug's actually a guy who, if I went back to this napkin again, he's followed this whole leadership path. He's actually now one of our directors, but he was actually my neighbor, a guy who didn't have a lot of church background really at all. Kind of really came just because his wife wanted him to, and he thought it might be good for his kids. And kind of got tricked into being a part of my group, mostly probably by his wife. But then he kind of started liking it, and we became friends. And I remember, we had no apprentice leader in the group, and so I totally, because I knew I could get away with him, I totally put him on the spot in front of the whole group and asked him to be my apprentice leader. And basically, he got kind of manipulated into doing it. And so he became my apprentice leader. And I remember our first time we got together, he was like, okay, so if I'm your apprentice leader, I guess if I'm an apprentice leader in this group, I should probably read the Bible, right? And I was like, that's true. And he's like, how do you do it? And so basically I took this journal again and I said, well, here's how I do it. And I showed him basically what I do is I read it, after I do my RPMs, I read a chapter, I pick out a verse, here's the way I do it. And I just showed him how, for sake of brevity. And so pretty soon he started doing that. And one of the things we do with all our apprentices, I would meet with him every week we actually met at Starbucks at 4:00 on Tuesdays. And every Tuesday at 4:00 we would meet and we would talk about the group, we talk about life, we talk about leadership development, all that kind of stuff we were going through. And it was probably about 14 months later, he got to the place where he thought he was ready to lead the group himself. And so I turned it over to him and I went and actually started another group. What was fascinating though was, I think it was 2 weeks later, I showed up at that Starbucks on Tuesday at 4:00, and Doug was there. And he was actually sitting at the same table that we were sitting at. You sit at. But across from him was a guy named Brad, who he had asked to become his apprentice. Now, I don't remember. I'm sure I must have some point in time, but I don't remember ever specifically telling him, saying, "Hey, you have to have an apprentice leader," because he didn't really have, a lot of church baggage, and he'd only really been exposed to community's culture. I think he just assumed all churches do it this way.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? He's what you call he was unconsciously competent.
Yep.
I love it.
And what happens when you develop a strong enough culture, going back to that, where your actions always match your values, where the things you're doing match what you say is important. What happens, you develop a strong enough culture, and as people get into this culture, pretty soon they just get enculturated into it, and all of a sudden things that are abnormal to the outside world become normal inside your church. And so for us at Community, there's some leaders who don't have apprentices, but if they don't, they know they should, and they're trying to figure it out, because that's the abnormal. The normal is, of course, you have an apprentice, and you have it all the way through the system. And I think that's what I tell church planners. Establish your values, make sure your practices match those values, and you create a strong enough culture that brand new people, they just get enculturated into it, and pretty soon they just start living it out.
It's awesome. Good stuff, man. Well, Dave, we know that we got to let you go. You got to run. So it has been awesome having you on here, man. Honored. And, if people want to track with Dave, they can go to New Thing. Is it newthing.com?
Newthing.org is our church planning network's website. So newthing.org, they can do that. If they want to follow me on Twitter and see trips to Dunkin' Donuts and Big Apple Bagel, it's Dave Ferguson. Or they can actually get it by my website, daveferguson.org. We're getting ready for a relaunch here pretty soon, but they can still check it out if they want.
Awesome, man. Well, you know what? It's I've loved everything that you've shared. It's been great stuff, and I want to ask that you send that napkin to me, because I will seriously keep that. Dave Ferguson made me a napkin, so you. Hey man, you either got to mail it to me, or I'm gonna have to come get it.
Come to Chicago and get it. We'll get some Chicago style pizza.
Woo!
Nice.
All right, man. I love it. Hey, Dave, thanks for coming on, man.
That'd be fun.
All right. Well, Dave's going to take off, and Pete and I are going to stick around for a little bit, and we're going to answer some of your questions.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, see you, man.
All righty. Hopefully, we're back. Peyton,
Yes.
are you there?
Yes, my master. I hear and obey.
All right, I think we got through that. I think it worked. First time using this technology.
Yeah. Yeah. You know me in technology, right?
Yes, I do know you in technology. So I think we were able to answer all the questions that were coming up during the video. So,
It was just a bunch of smack talk on there.
well, yeah, but, we addressed the smack talk.
Oh, absolutely. We smacked them down.
That's right. That's right. So we'll just go ahead and wrap it up. We told everyone we'd be done probably in about 3 hours, so we're just a little bit over that, so that's pretty cool. Here's what's going to happen going forward. If this is something that you're thinking about, we're going to have the replay up. It'll be up for the next 3 days. We might put it up longer than that, but I usually don't on replays. And so if you want to sign up for Jump School, you just simply go to jumpschooltraining.com. and you can get signed up. We will take the section of the webinar where we went through what all is included in Jump School, and we will put that up on the site so you can look through that. I know Joe was saying he wanted something to show his wife before he signed up, so I think that's probably the best way to walk people through it, is just to stick it up there on the website and let them actually take a look at it.
Yeah, I get it, man. Joe, I totally get your concern wanting to walk through it. And just so you know, I wrote this on the chat, but my wife also writes churchplantingisforgirls.com. It's a blog for church planners that are female. She has been doing what I've been doing for years, but like Ginger Rogers said, just keep in mind everything that Fred Astaire did, I did backwards and in high heels. And so she's been with me the whole leg of the journey. She writes a blog, and anyways, there is stuff. We are going to have females chiming in. It's not a man's club. I know some of you men are like, dang it, but for Barry, that is really good because that means he might find his wife. But most likely it's going to be church planners' wives, Barry. Sorry, they're taken. They're off limits to you. But anyways, yeah, I mean, Joe, I think that's awesome. And we didn't say this, but for those who are joining, for the first month, what we do as well is we call you and we find out a little bit about you, what your situation is, and what you're doing. It's important to us. If you're joining this Jump School training, that we get to know you a bit and we get to hear what you're actually dealing with. I think that's where Pete and I's skill set, our gifting, comes out. We're not by any means taken away from the Holy Spirit. We feel that God has gifted us in the Holy Spirit with the ability to understand how to reach a culture, and that's something that we do very well in tag team together. So looking forward to talking to you guys that sign up, and thanks for checking us out, man. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really, really humbled by all the people that join.
Yeah, and I would just, in closing, say there's something that we forgot to mention, that obviously we know you're going to benefit from this, but you don't know yet if this is going to be the right thing for you. And so if you're on the fence and you're like, is this something I should do? What if it ends up not being as good as they claim it's going to be? I'm not getting the info I thought I was going to get. So this is what I would say. I'd say sign up. We're going to be doing some stuff this month, but it officially kicks off next month with all of the targeted content. We already went over what's going to happen in each month. Go through that whole August material that we're going to be going through, the conference calls, etc. And if you can't make it to any of the live stuff, it is all going to be recorded so you can still listen in, because we realize most church planners are BIVO, and you're not going to be able to take off the time. But if at the end of August you're like, you know what, I don't think this is right for me, let us know. We'll give you your money back. No questions asked. I mean, we're not we don't want people in it who this isn't right for them. And the only way I can see that I can for sure know that everybody is in it who needs to be in it is to just do 100% money back guarantee. And as I like to say, I'm willing to bet that you're going to learn so much and have such a great experience in this that at the end of August, you would be willing to be covered in chum and jump into the ocean in the middle of a great white feeding frenzy rather than give up your membership in jump school. But if not, send us an email. You don't even have to call us, and we will cancel your membership and refund your money 100%. So with that, Peyton, any final closing thoughts?
Get the chum bucket ready. That's all I'm saying. Start cutting some chum.
All right, guys, get on over to jumpschooltraining.com. Get signed up. In fact, I'm going to see if I can redirect everyone over to that page. And we will talk to you guys soon. We'll talk to you on the next podcast.
Yeah, thanks for joining, guys. We appreciate your time, and we know you're busy. Keep doing what you're doing. You guys that are BIVO, that are out there planning, you are my heroes. And it's because of what you do that I do what I do. So we want to remind you, like we do every week, this in the name of the Church Planner Podcast and Church Planner Magazine. If you want to reach the ones nobody's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.